Chapter 853. The West Hill Divine Palace was not an unknown place like the Jishou Abbey or the Xiankong Temple, but it was not in the mortal world either, because in the eyes of ordinary believers, it was the divine kingdom on earth. Today, several horsemen came from the foot of Peach Mountain at a high speed, as if they wanted to bring some news from the mortal world to the divine kingdom. Naturally, no one laughed. The priests and deacons of the divine hall began to check, and they were not surprised to see a very high-ranking waste token. When they found that these knights and several carriages had returned from Chang'an, they could not help but become more and more serious. They looked at each other with a surprised expression. Is the war really going to start again? The carriages continued to the Peach Mountain, under the protection of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall. Smoke billowed all the way until they stopped in front of the Divine Hall of Light, in front of the cliff yard. The two girls in white clapped their hands gently. Dozens of deacons walked out from the side of the Divine Hall of Light. They carried a pile of green cloth and pulled it to the front of the hall. These green cloth curtains were about 3 people's height and very long. They surrounded the entire square in front of the Divine Hall. Even if someone looked from the White Divine Hall at the highest point of Peach Mountain, it would be difficult for them to see what was behind the green cloth curtains. Now, there were only cavalrymen and carriages returning from Chang, and behind the green cloth curtains. Those travel-worn people did not have time to salute the two girls in white. They opened a carriage and helped a person out. A girl in white looked at the divine priest in charge of this mission and asked in a childish voice, "Are you sure it's not wrong?" The divine priest said solemnly, "It's definitely not wrong. We used the old people in the Southern Gate Temple and confirmed that this person has been in Lin 47th Street all these years." The girl in white looked at the middle-aged man beside the carriage and nodded with satisfaction. The middle-aged man's greasy clothes and laborious hands revealed his ordinary identity. He looked very nervous at the moment. An ordinary Chang, and citizen who had never seen the world, had been tricked and kidnapped outside the city. Then he had traveled day and night. When he got out of the carriage, he found himself in the divine kingdom of Haotian's believers, the West Hill Divine Palace. Who wouldn't be shocked? In fact, it was not easy for him to support himself with the carriage. He was also a believer of Haotian. Logically speaking, when he suddenly found out that he had come to the West Hill Divine Palace, other than fear and confusion, he should also be a little excited. However, the war between the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang Empire had just ended. As a Tang, he felt that it would not be a good thing to welcome him. Another girl dressed in white asked the priest, "Did you bring back the other thing?" The priest was the most loyal subordinate of the Divine Hall of Light. Until now, he still did not know what task he was carrying out, but he could vaguely guess that it must be related to the biggest secret of the Divine Hall. He took a few cautious steps forward and took out an object wrapped in cloth. He said in a low voice, "The tomb was too close to the academy, so we did not dare to act rashly. The old brush pen shop was also guarded, and the courtyard wall was demolished a few months ago. Fortunately, the object was buried under the rubble and was not found. We finally got it back after paying a price." The West Hill Divine Palace had sneaked into Chang and wanted to take back something from the old brush pen shop. He said it lightly, but everyone knew that the price must be very heavy. The girl dressed in white took the object wrapped in cloth and slightly lowered her arm. The object seemed to be a little heavy. She did not ask anything else and signaled the divine priest to lead all the subordinates out of the green curtain. Then, she walked in front of the absent-minded man and said, "Let's start." The middle-aged man asked blankly, "Start doing what?" A girl dressed in white said, "Do what you are best at. Don't say that you can't do it well. All the materials you need are in the carriage. Even the pots and stoves have been moved here." Only then did the middle-aged man know what they wanted him to do. He was even more shocked and confused. Did they kidnap him from thousands of miles away to the Divine Hall just for this? This matter was too strange. However, he had to bow his head when he was under someone else's roof. Now that he was in front of the Divine Hall, he did not dare to say anything when he saw such a vast array of people. He obediently took out the pots and pans, stoves and all kinds of materials from the carriage, and began to work. The people of the West Hill Divine Palace did not leave out anything. The pots and pans, the stove, the flour, scallions, chili oil, vinegar, and even the firewood were all the things he had used in the past 10 years. The firewood was ignited and smoke came out of the old stove. Water was poured into the basin. The flour became thin, then gradually thickened, and then thinned again. It was obviously inappropriate to use it to make steamed buns, and even more inappropriate to use it to make noodles. The kitchen knife fell on the not-so-clean cutting board. He chopped the scallions and coriander into small pieces. Then, he began to add seasonings such as soy sauce and vinegar into the bowl. The girl dressed in white said, "There can be no mistakes, no matter the amount or the order." The middle-aged man thought that he had made hundreds of bowls every morning for the past 10 years. How could he make mistakes? However, that was what he thought, but he didn't dare to say it. At this time, the water in the pot finally boiled. The dough in the basin was torn into irregular shapes by his hands and thrown into the boiling water one by one. It quickly took shape and began to float. He dipped the blackened spoon into the pot and stirred it. When he took it out, it was filled to the brim with cooked slices of dough. The white shards trembled lightly like fish fat. There was not a single piece left in the pot, and the spoon was exactly 1/3 filled with soup. Such craftsmanship was naturally the result of repeated practice for more than 10 years. The soup was poured into the bowl. An unusually strong but refreshing sour and spicy aroma appeared in the square in front of the divine hall of light. Then, the smell of chopped coriander and scallions assailed the nose. The two girls dressed in white did not show any expression. They looked down and walked back into the divine hall. One of them held the bowl in her hands, and the other held the thing wrapped in cloth. The middle-aged man said subconsciously, "One bowl is not enough for the two of you, right?" The girl from the old brush pen shop used to eat one bowl and bring back 2 bowls when she was so thin. The two girls dressed in white ignored him and walked into the divine hall. The middle-aged man looked at the boiling water in the pot and held the big spoon in his hand. He stood in the empty square in front of the solemn divine hall, feeling very nervous. Not long after, a girl dressed in white came out of the divine hall of light. She handed several things to the middle-aged man and said, "Someone will send you back to Chang'an." After saying this, she went back into the divine hall of light and did not come out again. The middle-aged man was stunned for a long time before he remembered to look at the things in his hand. They were a perfect luminous pearl and an elixir that gave off a faint fragrance. Although he was an ordinary person, he could feel that these 2 things were extraordinary. He became more and more frightened. He had always been proud of his craftsmanship, but it was not worth it. The nobles of the divine halls of West Hill had kidnapped him from Chang and to the Peach Mountain and given him a luminous pearl and an elixir. Just for a bowl of something worthless? Was there such a delicious sour and spicy noodle soup in the world? The green curtain was removed. The carriage drove down the Peach Mountain, stirring up the dust again and returning to the mortal world. Ninkei held a bag of rice in his hand. He looked at the carriage and frowned. He did not know that the carriage came from Chang'an. Like the rest of the people in the divine hall, he had many doubts. He turned around and walked back to the Revelation Institute through the side door. He did not look at the divine halls on the mountain. It was not because he was cautious, but because he did not want to look at them too many times to suppress his desire. She and that idiot that he was looking for were there. However, there were even more dangers. Before he was fully prepared, before that point in time, he did not want to take a step closer to the temple. He left Chang and came here with the determination to die, but he did not want to die. The Revelation Institute was very quiet. He walked back to his room and prepared to cook. Looking at the bag of rice, he suddenly wanted to eat a bowl of noodles, a bowl of fragrant fried egg noodles. He stood in front of the stove and kept silent for a long time. Then he began to cut the scallions and took out the eggs he bought in the town at the foot of the mountain. He heated the oil, fried an egg, and cooked a bowl of noodles. A bowl of noodles with fried egg noodles, with 4 Sichuan peppercorns and 30 scallions. He held the bowl and walked to the depths of the book hall. He looked at the clouds and cliffs, thinking of the city of Wei and the old brush pen shop, and began to eat the noodles. He ate very quickly and in the end, he even drank all the broth at the bottom of the bowl. He had not cooked for many years, but his cooking skills did not fall behind. The fried egg noodles were still delicious, but he actually did not enjoy it because she did not cook it. He stood there for a long time until the moon appeared. The beautiful moon in the night sky had returned to its original fullness. But he was still worried because he did not know if the moon would continue to waxing and waning tomorrow night. He was also worried about other things. That emotion was more like fear. Aren't you omniscient and omnipotent? Why don't you know I am here? Why can't I feel where you are? Are you really not my natal life anymore? Or is the you I am looking for really dead, and the you now is not you? He thought to himself as he looked at the divine hall on the peak, where no light leaked out. Behind the divine hall of light was the cliff behind the mountain. Below the cliff was the legendary U prison. The clouds and fog became thicker at night, as if there was a cold and evil aura overflowing. She stood between the stone pillars and the cliff with her hands clasped behind her back. She looked indifferently at the bright moon in the night sky. Her plump and tall body was tightly wrapped in a green cloth, reflecting a lonely figure on the ground. The moon had been missing for more than 10 days and began to return to its full state. Her face became paler and paler, not holy and solemn, but weak. Behind her were hundreds of wine jars and a bowl of hot and sour noodle slices, soup that she had only taken a mouthful of. Beside the bowl was a square object. A corner of the cloth on it was lifted, revealing the gold bricks and some brick dust inside. The wine was Jiujiang double-distilled liquor, and the hot and sour noodle slice soup was from Chang'an. The gold brick had been hidden in the wall of the old brush pen shop all these years. These were useless memories she hated the most, so she had to get them back. Or it was like this. There's a big bug. Regarding the moon's waxing and waning, I mentioned a few strokes earlier, but I forgot to write them myself. I always thought that I didn't write them, and was happily waiting for this moment to play with this stroke. I didn't expect that I would play myself into a fool. From my original intention, I have already corrected the 2 places I found earlier, and I sincerely apologize to everyone. The day before yesterday, he didn't sleep for an entire day and night. It was the first time in his life that he felt airsick. The journey was tough, and he wouldn't go out for a month, even if he was beaten to death. He would write his book and live happily with everyone. According to the schedule, the report was updated as follows: 2 chapters tomorrow, 1 chapter the day after tomorrow, and 2 chapters the day after that. Along the way, I had a great time writing. They were all my favorites, and I was very satisfied with the chapter names. Just like the day before yesterday, if I don't continue to praise myself, I can't keep my eyes open. Finally, there's one thing that I want to report again. There are some very beautiful sentences in Jiangyi, which I have seen everywhere. I really can't find the original author, so there's no name. I can only state the source, such as the fish leaping into the sea, the flower blooming on the shore, or that spring, I cut a few caddies of peach blossoms, or that time stew, which I will use in the future. I've reported these before, but I dare not falsely claim this honor. But some readers may not notice, so I'm reporting it again. The original authors are awesome, and I'm a hard-working porter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 854. Sang Sang looked at the moon in the night sky. When the moon was waning, she was as powerful as she had been in the past countless years. When the moon was full, she felt unprecedentedly weak, or in other words, she felt her own weakness in the divine kingdom. That person once said that the moon waxed and waned, and people had their ups and downs. Then what about her? From the moment she fell into the snow-capped peak in the far north, she wanted to leave the human world and return to her own kingdom, because she sensed danger. She was in danger both in the divine kingdom and in the human world. However, the gate of the divine kingdom had been destroyed. How could she go back? Tonight, on the Peach Mountain, different people looked at the same moon and thought about different things. Some wanted to leave, some wanted to stay, but they didn't know if they wanted to see each other. She stood on the balcony behind the divine hall of light for a long time, until the moon disappeared, and the sky in the east of the mountains turned white. The morning light sprinkled on her, but she still didn't leave. The morning clouds were covered with strange colors, and were blown away by an unknown wind, revealing the red and warm sun. She bathed in the sunlight and slowly squinted her eyes. Her expression was peaceful and beautiful. She was the rule of this world, and also the ruler of this world. She fell into the human world, and gradually became immortal. She didn't need to cultivate, and only needed to bask in the sun. Although she didn't know if the red sun was real or fake, the light and heat were real, and they were the source of her power. As for the wine and dishes, they were just nutrients that her body needed. Or more importantly, they were needed to weaken her consciousness. Now she was very plump, or in other words, very fat. Her body stretched the cyan dress with flowers. She was very white and tall, which was completely different from her appearance in the past 19 years. However, her eyes didn't change. They were still thin and long like willow leaves, and extremely clear. She squinted and became even thinner, like the willow leaves by the Yanming Lake in Chang'an. But it didn't mean that she could still see everything in front of her when she closed her eyes. The red sun leaping out of the morning glow, the filamentous clouds in the flowing wind, and the thin waterfall between the cliffs all appeared in her bright eyes. She saw birds flying back and forth between the cliffs, cubs in the distant mountains, reefs appearing in the distant seawater, and the heat of the sun turning the seawater into steam. All of these scenes represented the rules at work. The rules of this world could not be shaken and appeared very stable. Therefore, the world also appeared very stable. The chi of heaven and earth, and all matter were distributed very evenly. She was the rules, so she felt very satisfied. There was still no expression on her face, but in the deepest part of her eyes, one could almost see the intoxicated expression of a human. She was intoxicated by the harmony between herself and the world. She continued to stand on the balcony at the back of the Divine Hall of Light, looking at the scenery that kept changing, but in fact remained the same. She did not leave until the night came again, and the moonlight shone again. The moon tonight was different from last night, and she did not like it. The moon waxed and waned. She did not experience any misfortune or fortune, but she felt the aura of birth, old age, sickness, and death. It was an aura that she hated, because it was an aura that only humans could feel. Because of this feeling of hatred, the scenery behind the Divine Hall of Light suddenly became unstable. She hated it even more. The sound of the wind blowing through the trees was like thunder in her ears. The waterfall falling into the clouds seemed to be silent, but in her ears, it sounded like someone was beating war drums. She could no longer enjoy the peace she liked. Even if she threw all the wine jars behind her down the cliff, she could not change the fact that she had drunk all the hard liquor in the jars. I planned to go out for a walk. She looked at the bright moon in the night sky and said. The two girls in white kneeled behind her, too shocked to speak. They had never seen the Saintess leave the Divine Hall of Light since they came to Peach Mountain. The people in the Divine Halls of West Hill had never seen the Saintess face. Why did she suddenly want to leave? Where was she going? The next morning, a very ordinary carriage stopped in front of the Divine Hall of Light. The big black horse poked his head out of the hall and looked at the two war horses from West Hill in front of the carriage. His eyes were full of killing intent. He wanted to let the two war horses know the difficulty and retreat, so that he could create an opportunity. She walked out from the depths of the Divine Hall and glanced at him. The big black horse hurriedly took a few steps back and bent his front hooves. He knelt on the frozen ground of the Divine Hall and grinned foolishly. He looked very obedient and even servile. She sat in the carriage and closed her eyes to rest. A girl in white waited on her in the carriage. The other girl in white waved her whip and drove the carriage away from the Divine Hall of Light and down the Peach Mountain. The more ordinary a carriage was, the more conspicuous it would be in the solemn Divine Hall. But strangely, it seemed that none of the priests or deacons saw the carriage, nor did they hear the sound of the hooves or the whip of the girl in white. The carriage quietly went down the Peach Mountain like a ghost. The carriage did not stop at the foot of the mountain. It continued forward for more than 10 miles, crossed a stone bridge over a small river, and came to a small town. Then it stopped in front of a shop opposite the Taoist hall of the town. Ning Ke woke up early in the morning. He first practiced a set of bladesmanship to warm up. Then he sat cross-legged in the morning fog and meditated for a while. He began to breathe in and out, borrowing the abundant chi of heaven and earth in the Peach Mountain into his body and turning it into his own great spirit. The whole process was carried out very carefully. The morning fog was still there when he finished. He walked up the path behind the book hall. He could smell the faint fragrance of flowers in the fog, and he could not help but feel refreshed. At this moment, the red sun had completely risen, and the mountain fog suddenly disappeared. He found thousands of peach trees were in full bloom beside him. He could not help but frown in disgust. Years ago, the headmaster of academy climbed the mountain while drinking and cut down all the peach trees. Since then, the peach trees here had never bloomed again. However, this spring, the eternal lamp in the divine hall of light suddenly went out, and the peach trees on the mountain bloomed for no reason. They never withered again, even in the middle of summer. He loved the peach trees in front of the academy, because they were brought back by the headmaster of academy from the Peach Mountain. He did not love the peach trees in the West Hill Divine Palace, because they represented the departure of the headmaster of academy, and that matter. There seemed to be a path in the depths of the peach trees, but he did not know where it led. Ning Ke walked towards it, and suddenly felt the mountain wind suddenly became cold. The petals on the branches kept trembling, as if it had suddenly come to winter. There was a very powerful tactical array hidden in the peach trees. No wonder the headmaster would kill these peach trees when he climbed the mountain. Ning Ke thought about it, and decided to quit immediately. With his current state and attainments in talisman Taoism, it should not be difficult for him to quit, since he was not deep into the tactical array. But it was impossible for him to continue forward and break the array. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a very familiar aura in the peach trees on the mountain. He could even vaguely understand the intention of these peach trees. He did not know anything about tactical arrays, but he knew that this was the key to break the array. These peach trees were blooming for him. If it were someone else, he would definitely be shocked and confused by this sudden change, and then have the idea of temporarily retreating. But he did not, because he quickly figured out the reason. The peach trees on the mountain were blooming because of her. How could they stop him? His sleeves brushed against the peach trees, and the petals fell and fragrant. He did not need to look for the direction, nor did he care about the powerful tactical array in the peach trees. He just walked according to the feelings of the peach trees. It did not take long for him to walk through the peach trees, which were extremely dangerous for cultivators. Outside the peach trees was a precipice. He stood on the edge of the cliff and looked at the towering divine halls above. Only then did he realize that he had reached the mountainside. Then he looked at the opposite side and found that there was another precipice there. The cliff he was standing on was part of the Peach Mountain, and the precipice on the opposite side was also part of the Peach Mountain. It was obviously under several divine halls, but for some reason it was independent of the Peach Mountain. The two precipices were dozens of feet apart. There was no bridge between them except for the mountain wind. Below them, there were clouds and mist, and there was a faint cold aura. No one knew how deep it was. A distance of dozens of feet was not far for cultivators, especially for cultivators from the Devil's Doctrine. However, looking at the ground on the edge of the cliff and the moss on the opposite precipice, it seemed that no one had ever been here, and no one had ever appeared on the opposite precipice. The two precipices had never been connected. The two precipices looked at each other in silence for tens of thousands of years, and no one knew if they had ever hated each other. A chilly wind blew from the bottom of the precipice, and the clouds and mist dissipated slightly. There seemed to be something on the opposite precipice. Ning Ke's eyesight was excellent, and he seemed to see several rows of stone windows. He was a little uncertain, and continued to look. When the next mountain wind blew, the clouds and mist dissipated again, and he found that there were indeed stone windows on the precipice. Could it be the legendary U-prison used by the West Hill Divine Palace to imprison traitors? He looked at the opposite precipice and frowned slightly. He looked for a while longer, and suddenly closed his eyes. Tears flowed from the corners of his eyes. It was not because he pitied the predecessors of the devil's doctrine, who had died in the U-prison for thousands of years. It was also not because he thought of the great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned in the U-prison for more than 10 miles. It was also not because of the bloody smell and gloomy aura coming from the stone window on the precipice that made him feel pity. It was because his eyes were very painful. There was nothing in front of him except for the mountain wind. But at that moment, it was as if there was an invisible finger gently touching his eyes. The force was very gentle, but the eyes were the most delicate part of a human. Even though he had almost mastered the Great Spirit, he still felt a piercing pain, and he could not help but shed tears. After a while, he opened his eyes and looked at the precipice again. Then he closed his eyes and began to cry again. This time, he shed more tears, because the force that fell into his eyes was even stronger. He was sure that the aura that touched his eyes came from the precipice. He knew that if he continued to look, the counterattack from the precipice would become stronger. There was a big tactical array between the precipices, which could prevent anyone from peeping into the U-prison, no matter if one was standing dozens of feet away or thousands of miles away. As long as one looked at the precipice, one's eyes would be touched. No one could avoid it, because when one looked, it was not one's eyes that fell on the precipice, but the image of the precipice that entered one's eyes. The power of the tactical array would follow. This tactical array was called eye-catching. There will be 2 chapters tomorrow. Recently, the updates have been more ordinary, but I am quite satisfied with the writing. However, I will not write a single chapter. It will be Monday soon, so please vote for it. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 855. Ning-Ke was not allowed to look at the precipice, but Ning-Ke insisted. He stared at the clouds between the precipice and the stone windows that were faintly discernible. His eyes became more and more sore. Finally, it was as if he had been stabbed by thousands of swords. He closed his eyes and began to cry, looking extremely sad. When he opened his eyes, they were already red and swollen. He did not know the name of the tactical array between the precipice, but he had truly experienced the magic of this tactical array. He thought to himself that Haotian Taoism was indeed the #1 sect in the world. It was extremely profound. Even though it had shown signs of decline over the years, at least it could not be seen around the West Hill Divine Palace. The tactical array between the precipice was to prevent people from peeping into the U-prison, as long as one kept a sufficient distance, or did not insist on looking through the clouds. It would not cause too much damage. Ning-Ke was not afraid. He thought that the tactical array of the West Hill Divine Palace was so powerful, and the tactical array of the Jisho Abbey must be even more amazing. Eldest brother had gone to the Jisho Abbey in late autumn last year. If Chun Pippi had not done something in the Jisho Abbey, it would have been difficult for Ning-Ke to enter the abbey. Not to mention that the tomes of arcane in the Jisho Abbey had held up the abbey dean for such a long time. He wondered how Chun Pippi was doing now. He looked at the flowing clouds and the bright sun between the Peach Mountain cliffs, and missed his best friend in the world. Then he thought of Chun Pippi's father, the abbey dean who had been hacked out of Chang, and by thousands of knives. He did not know whether the abbey dean was dead or alive. Neither the Tang Empire nor the West Hill Divine Palace had any news of him. He did not know if the great man had returned to the Jisho Abbey, or if he had become a cold corpse in the straw mat on the way home. Ning-Ke had never met his youngest uncle. The abbey dean was the most powerful human being he had seen after his master. Recalling the battle on the snowy street of Chang'an, he was still in awe. If such a powerful human being were to disappear quietly in the long river of history, he would welcome such an ending, but he would also feel regret. He left the cliff and passed through the peach trees to return to the book hall of the Revelation Institute. He looked around for old Divine Hall maintenance files, trying to find some clues about the tactical array on the precipice, but to no avail. By the time he woke up from the sea of books, it was still early, but he felt hungry. Only then did he remember that he had not eaten breakfast today. He walked to the kitchen and looked at the rice and vegetables, but he did not feel like eating. Ever since Sang Sang grew up, he rarely cooked, especially now that he was in the West Hill Divine Palace. Every time he stood in front of the stove and looked at the brilliant Divine Palace outside the window, he felt annoyed. However, people always needed to eat. Even with his current realm, it was not a big deal for him to not eat for more than 10 days. But his psychological and spiritual needs had to be satisfied. At this moment, he remembered that last summer, when the headmaster of the academy took him and Sang Sang to travel through the West Hill, he took him to eat something good. Outside the town, there was a stone bridge with flowing water. The scenery was clear and beautiful. One could see the Peach Mountain more than 10 miles away when they looked up. However, this was not the right path, so there were not many believers who came to visit. There was an old man with a face full of wrinkles in the shop opposite the Taoist temple. There were a few iron buckets sealed with yellow mud at the door of the shop. Some of the broken rims of the buckets gave off a sweet fragrance. The old man was drinking. His yellow callous fingers pinched a handful of peanuts and chewed them from time to time. The wrinkles on his face were full of black ash, which had been floating out of the iron buckets for decades and could not be washed clean. An ordinary horse carriage stopped in front of the shop. The girl in white stared at the iron buckets curiously, wondering what kind of sweet potatoes were roasted inside. How could they be so sweet and fragrant that people would eat them on such a hot summer day? Even the saintess had to leave the Peach Mountain to buy them? They came a little late, and the roasted sweet potatoes were bought by 2 deacons of the Revelation Divine Hall. So they had to wait outside the shop, which was a little boring. Sang Sang sat in the carriage. She did not feel bored. To her, boredom was a boring emotion that only human beings would have. Time was just the order of things, and it had no meaning. Moreover, her time had always been useful. For example, when she looked at the steam and fragrance coming out of the roasted sweet potatoes through the curtain, she was actually feeling the rules of heat. Or in other words, she was feeling herself. If someone knew what she was doing now, he would definitely think that she was very narcissistic. But in fact, she did not even have the feeling of narcissism. More than 10 papal cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill escorted a divine priest. They passed by the town, and it seemed that they were going to cross the stream and go straight back to the Peach Mountain. That divine priest was He Mingqi. He studied under Li Qingshan, the nation master of the Tang Empire. He was the most important person of the Divine Halls of West Hill in the Tang Empire, the Knight of Blood and Fire in Chang, and was one of his means. Most importantly, he destroyed the God-stunning array in Chang'an. According to the hierarch's reward, he alone was more important than all the cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill. The Divine Halls of West Hill knew that He Mingqi was the one that the Tang Empire and the Academy wanted to kill the most. Even when the Divine Halls negotiated with the Tang Empire, they did not include his safety in their conditions, because they knew that the Tang Empire, especially the Academy, would never accept this condition. Therefore, for the sake of safety, the Divine Halls sent He Mingqi to the south to hide for a while. Only now did he return to Peach Mountain. Sang Sang looked at He Mingqi in the distance through the curtain. She did not show any emotion on her face, but she did not know why her body was filled with extreme hatred. She knew that this person was extremely loyal to her, and he was the trusted subordinate of the hierarch's loyal dog. He would be given an important position when he returned to the Divine Halls. But she still hated him. In fact, she did not know why she hated the ant in the red robe. But she did not accept this reason. So she thought that she did not know, The sweet potatoes were finally baked. The old man squinted and took out 3 hot sweet potatoes with his bare hands. He did not seem to feel the heat from his fingers. After wrapping them in paper, he handed them to the girl in white standing in front of the shop. The girl in white took out money from her waist and put it down. Then she returned to the carriage with the hot sweet potatoes. She lifted the curtain and handed 1 sweet potato in, and then handed the other 2 to her companion. The whip was crisp, and the wheels sounded gradually. Then it suddenly stopped. The girl in white stopped the carriage. Because she felt the irresistible will from the carriage, she and her companion sat quietly in front of the carriage, waiting for what might happen. After a while, a young man in the uniform of the Divine Hall's handyman walked to the front of the shop. He looked at the old man and asked, "Has your shop really been open for 1,000 years?" Ning-Kei saw the ordinary horse carriage outside the shop, but he did not pay much attention to it. But when he saw the two girls who looked like they were made of snow, he could not help but think of his little black handmaiden. He silently thought that since they were working for the master, black was better than white. No matter how they cleaned, they would not look dirty, right? The old man squinted and said, "My grandfather's grandfather's grandfathers." Ning-Kei did not want to hear him finish reciting the ancestral genealogy. He took out a copper coin and said, "Give me 3. The old man said, "My sweet potatoes are big. You can't finish 3. Ning-Kei bought 3 sweet potatoes purely subconsciously, one for his teacher, one for himself, and one for Sang-Sang. Hearing this, he understood and said, "Then 2 will be fine." The old man took out 2 sweet potatoes with his bare hands and handed them to him. He put away the copper coin and began to drink again. The headmaster of the academy once said that eating sweet potatoes in the hot summer had to be done while they were still hot, just like eating ice in winter. What they sought was the extreme of the extreme and the stimulation of the stimulation. Ning-Kei was not a pure filial disciple. He had forgotten many of the words his teacher had said, but he remembered all the words his teacher had said about food, because he insisted that compared to the title of the greatest man in the world, the title of the greatest gourmet in the world was more suitable for his teacher. He held the sweet potatoes and sat on the threshold. He pinched his fingers and tore the skin. The red and yellow soft potato meat was steaming and exposed in the deep summer air. The sweet smell spread around. He endured the heat and began to eat the potato meat. It was so hot that he kept sticking out his tongue. In the carriage, Sang-Sang looked at the man on the threshold through the curtain. There was no emotion on her face. She was absolutely indifferent. However, she did not notice that the sweet potato in her hand had been crushed. She frowned in disgust and looked at the steaming potato meat. She raised her hand and took a bite. Then she began to eat again and again, as if she did not feel any heat at all. In the deep summer town it was hot and quiet. Suddenly, the sound of cicadas came from the tree behind the house. They had just finished their afternoon nap and began to celebrate their reunion with their companions after an hour of separation. He sat on the threshold and ate the sweet potato. She sat in the carriage and ate the sweet potato. There was only a thin curtain between them. It was very quiet in front of the sweet potato shop. The old man drank several cups of wine and chewed 3 pinches of peanuts. He was slightly tipsy and began to hum with his dusty fingers while tapping on the barrel edge. Ning-Kei sat on the threshold and listened to the song. Although it was simple, it was somewhat beautiful. Especially the lyrics, although ordinary, they were somewhat meaningful. Ning-Kei gradually became entranced. Picking firewood with a knife, but afraid of frightening the moving mountain ghost. Rain falls on the banana leaves. Last year's cicada slew falls on the shoes. Hanging on the vines, the mocking laughter in the clouds comes from the mouth of the monkey. After years of idleness, the pottery model under the rotten leaves has accumulated old dust. In the Honglua winterfield, the white snow regards the paw print as a burden. Looking at the sky, the clouds and smoke dissipate like smoke. Ning-Kei held the sweet potato and said in a daze, "Interesting." The old man became more and more proud of the guest's praise. His voice gradually became louder, but the tone suddenly became calmer, as if people in the countryside were talking. Cutting firewood to make a fence, planting 3 peach trees, picking the grain as rice, and then making 2 jars of wine, as light as water, picking flowers and twisting juice, making the bride's eyebrows drunk. Firecrackers sound, the old house cries new never tired. Little dear cry, calling the maid to cut a few plums and heat 2 pots of wine. Remembering the childhood sweetheart, who could bear to give up a cup? Ning-Kei thought of last summer, in front of this shop in this town. His teacher and her were still by his side, but now he was alone, and he could not help but feel sad. These 2 paragraphs are part of the spy's 27 cups of wine that I completed at the request of a reader a few days ago. For the full text, please read the comment section. I didn't pay attention when I wrote it, and only after I finished writing it did I realize that I was writing about coming night. Then writing this chapter is really a bit tiring. I am not capable, but I have high expectations of myself, so I can only keep squeezing myself. There is still one more chapter today, and I don't know when I can finish it, so I am working hard. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 856. The plain lyrics were about the ordinary affairs of men and women in the village, without any heart-wrenching tragedy. But somehow, those beautiful scenes of the past made people feel a little lost at the end. Ning-Ke had always thought that sentimentality was a luxury, especially now that he was in the West Hill Divine Palace, where his identity could be discovered at any time. So he did not let himself be immersed in this emotion for too long. He rubbed his eyes that were stung by the tactical array on the precipice, stood up from the threshold, and walked out of the town. Sang Sang sat quietly in the carriage, listening to the old man's song. She was not moved at all, but her consciousness was stirred up, as if the ocean was about to rush to the earth. Every drop of seawater in the raging waves represented extreme hatred. She hated the young man outside the carriage, even more than she hated He Mingqi. She frowned and pursed her lips. Her willowy eyes were as bright as a sharp knife. This was the first time she felt emotional since she came to the human world, so she hated him even more. Hatred would bring anger, and her anger was the wrath of heaven. Once it was angry, the world would change, the rivers would flood, and the people would lose their homes. No one could resist it. For some reason, she didn't want to kill this young man. More accurately, she didn't want to kill this young man right now. Thus, these past few nights, when she looked at the bright moon, she had been using unimaginable willpower to suppress the hatred and anger in her heart. Only the will of heaven could control the wrath of heaven. She hated him. She hated him. So she did not want to see him. She knew very well that once they met, she would hate him, and then she would not be able to suppress her will to destroy him. However, even she did not expect that she would meet him, hear his voice, and meet him in front of the sweet potato shop after leaving the divine hall of light for this town. Looking at his face and listening to his voice, she could no longer suppress her hatred and anger. A horrible aura gushed out from her plump and tall body and rushed to the sky. The summer sky was extremely clear, but suddenly countless black clouds floated from thousands of miles away and covered the entire West Hill Divine Kingdom. The sky suddenly became very dark. The cold wind was blowing in the woods and the fields, swaying the signs, throwing debris on the streets, and the shouts of closing windows could be heard from the houses. The scene in the West Hill Divine Palace was even more shocking. Countless bolts of lightning formed in the black clouds like golden threads and then fell, producing countless dull thunders. With a boom, a muffled thunder struck down from the depths of the dark clouds. Over 20 miles away, a faint flame could be seen on the Peach Mountain, and even the crackling sound of peach blossoms burning could be heard. Fortunately, a torrential downpour soon followed, extinguishing the burning peach blossoms. On the 3 cliff plateaus of the West Hill Divine Palace, countless divine priests and deacons knelt in the rain, looking at the sky in horror and praying. She looked at Ning-Ke through the curtain. Deep in her emotionless and cold eyes, there were stars being destroyed, worlds being reborn, an unimaginable majestic power. She had never really looked at Ning-Ke since he came to the small town. She decided to look at him for the last time, when the will of destruction was about to fall on the small town. Then she saw his eyes. Her eyes were red and swollen like peach blossoms, as if she had just cried. The unusually cold wind in the summer gradually stopped, and the majestic storm gradually subsided. Then it disappeared without a trace. The tens of thousands of miles of dark clouds that covered the West Hill Divine Kingdom dispersed to the corners of the world. Ning-Ke ran back to the sweet potato shop when it started raining. The thunderstorms in summer always came suddenly, and he had no doubt about it. He did not even notice that there was an aura in the horse carriage that shot up to the sky. After the headmaster of the academy left the human world, no one could feel such a level of aura. weak and incompetent human beings. Sang Sang looked at his red eyes through the curtain and said emotionlessly. Then, she continued to eat the sweet potato in her hand and did not look at him again, as if they had never met. Ning Ke looked at the carriage that was moving further and further away in the rain. He did not know why he felt a little depressed. He looked at the back wall of the carriage that was drenched by the rain and vaguely saw the back of a tall and fat woman. He frowned and said with disgust, "Why is the girl in the carriage as fat as a pig?" The old man said, "Gossiping behind people's backs. I don't know how your teacher taught you." Ning Ke did not answer until the horse carriage disappeared from his sight. Then he said, "She did not respond even after all this. It seems that she really did not hear it. She should be an ordinary person." The old man put down his cup and said with emotion, "So that's what you were thinking? When did the people from the academy become so cunning?" Ning Ke walked into the shop and took out the iron cutlass and iron arrows that he put here before entering the divine hall. He said to the old man with a smile, "I am not as capable as my teacher and uncle. Of course I have to be careful." The old man said, "Of course. When the headmaster of the academy came to the Peach Mountain, my father and I baked sweet potatoes for him here. He came back before they were cooked. How can you compare?" The West Hill Divine Kingdom was a place favored by Haotian. The 4 seasons were distinct and warm, and there had never been any natural disasters. The Peach Mountain where the Divine Hall was located was even more so. Even without the lightning-proof tactical array in the Divine Halls, there had been no lightning for thousands of years. That was why the thunderstorm today shocked many people. Except for the hierarch of the Divine Hall who had vaguely guessed the truth, the rest of the divine priests and deacons all knelt on the wet cliff platform and kept praying to the sky, begging Haotian to forgive their sins. The 3 cliff platforms were full of people kneeling, but still, no one could see the ordinary horse carriage slowly driving up the Peach Mountain, and no one could see Sang Sang and the 2 girls in white walking into the Divine Hall of Light. She stood in front of the cliff behind the Divine Hall, looking at the smallest raindrops that had turned into mist under her feet. She was silent as she thought of the man she saw in the small town. The gate of Haotian's divine kingdom was destroyed. She could not go back for the time being, and could only stay in the human world. It was natural for her to hate humans, especially that man. However, only she knew that there should not be any emotional connection between Haotian and humans. There should not be love or hate. Once she started to hate humans, it meant that she began to have human emotions. Just like when she looked at the table full of dishes in the capital of the Kingdom of Song, and that immortal couple. She hated this kind of hate. She could predict everything in the world, but she could not predict her own future. Just like today in the small town, she did not know that she would meet him. But if she did not want to, how could she meet him? In a sense, Ning Ke's eyes were pierced by the cliff array, which saved his life in front of the sweet potato shop in the small town. But he did not know it himself. After returning from the small town to the Revelation Institute, he continued to search for information, trying to find a way to break the cliff array. He was now basically sure that the stone window between the clouds and the precipice was the legendary U prison. It was a place the West Hill Divine Palace used to lock up felons and traitors. For countless years, no one had been able to escape except for Song Song's teacher, Wei Guangming. According to the information he found in a book, the U prison had been set up by the previous powerhouses of the Divine Hall, and one of them was the eye piercing that he had once felt. The precipice he cared about had nothing to do with the U prison. There was no one in the U prison who was worth his risk to save. The place he wanted to go was above the precipice. He wanted to go to the Divine Hall of Judgment at the top of Peach Mountain. Of course, this was only his last resort. The first place he wanted to go was the stables of the West Hill Divine Palace, which was on the 3rd cliff plateau. To go up Peach Mountain, he had to go through the mountain path and 3 cliff plateaus. Ning Ke did not think that he could go straight to the West Hill Divine Palace with his current state. After all, he was not the youngest uncle or his teacher. If he really dared to do so, he believed that he would die in less than half an hour. Therefore, he could not go the usual way, but the dead end. Late at night, Ning-Ke walked into the peach blossom forest. Even in the dark night, the thousands of peach trees in the mountain were still blooming pink and white. It was very beautiful. The peach trees that were struck by lightning a few days ago had already been removed by the deacons of the Divine Hall. They had returned to their original state. He walked among the peach blossoms, feeling a little strange. The peach blossoms all over the mountain were also a very terrifying tactical array, even more powerful than those on the precipice. Even a real powerhouse who had broken through the 5 states would find it very difficult to pass through the peach blossoms. Therefore, the Divine Hall did not need to set up any defensive power here. But for him, it was so easy to pass through, because the peach blossoms were planted by her. Every time he thought of this, he felt that things like fate were really hard to describe. When he came to the edge of the cliff, he did not look at the precipice, but jumped to the opposite side without hesitation. The 2 precipices were dozens of feet apart. Even the most powerful cultivators would see it as a natural moat. But for the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine and the cultivators at the peak of martial arts, it was just a shallow ditch. Ning-Ke's great spirit had almost reached the advanced level, except for third sister Yulian, Tang, and the Abbey Dean before he was injured. No one else could be stronger and more powerful than him. He did not need to run, nor did he use any strength. He bent his knees slightly, and the pond-like great spirit in his abdomen was suddenly sent to all parts of his body. Then he rushed to the opposite precipice. The night wind whistled and slapped his body, as if slapping a stone. In the blink of an eye, he came to the opposite precipice. His hands suddenly became soft and stuck to the precipice like cotton. Under his feet was a bottomless abyss, surrounded by clouds and mist, which looked even more gloomy and terrifying. The eye-catching tactical array on the precipice could not only block peeping eyes, but also the slightest fluctuation of a cultivator's psyche power. It was even more sensitive to the chi of heaven and earth hidden in the body of the Devil's Doctrine. In the moment before Ning-Ke fell to the precipice, he withdrew most of the Great Spirit back to the pond in his abdomen, and used the remaining Great Spirit to cover his snow mountain and ocean of chi. To avoid triggering the tactical array on the precipice, he did not dare to use talismans. In other words, he completely relied on his own strength to climb the precipice. He was now an ordinary person, but even so it was still not enough. Although he closed his eyes, the precipice seemed to think that he was looking. He felt a sharp pain in his eyes, and his hands that were grabbing the cliff stone suddenly loosened. There were cliff climbing in the Qing dynasty, among the guests and also at night. Of course, he would not fall down, because neither the bottomless abyss nor the landmine tactical array had anything to do with Ning Quebec. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 857. First, about the character contest. I didn't want to waste your energy, so I didn't open the character contest. Later, I heard that many readers wanted to play it, and it was really free. So last night, I made 3 characters, all female characters. The best actress, Sang Sang, and the 2 best supporting actresses, Shan Shan and Yi Hongyu. If you are interested, you can vote for them. Please look at the homepage of Chidian, or the related posts in the book review section. If you want to vote, I strongly recommend Sang Sang, because I am a fan of Sang Sang. Also, if you are a fan of Shan Shan or Hongyu, I will respect your opinion. I am just trying to get votes for Sang Sang. By the way, I said I won't get votes for monthly votes, but can I get votes for recommendations? As for the book review competition, there were already many excellent book reviews, but my announcement was delayed until now. I was so lazy that it made people's hair stand on end. The official announcement is as follows. Announcement of the coming Night Cup Book Review Contest. Purpose of the event in the past year. With the enthusiastic support of all readers, Coming Night achieved excellent results. It won the monthly votes of Chidian, and won the best work of 2012. As of now, Making Night had reached the 5th volume. In order to repay the readers, to liven up the book review section, and to better interact with each other, The book review section and Cats Making Night Bar had teamed up with YY 55373 channel to hold the Making Night Cup book review competition. All readers, please participate. 2. Time and place of the event. Submission time 0:00 on April 1st, 2013 to 2400 hours on May 11th, 2013. Submission place. Posting to Chidian Book Review section. Review time May 12th, 2013 to May 25th, 2013. Award time June 1st, 2013, Saturday. Award place Greasy Book Official YY 553733. Description of the book review contest. For the time being, all the participating books will not be classified and will be evaluated together. If there are more than 25 doujinshi works in the book review contest, the doujinshi will be evaluated separately and additional doujinshi prizes will be added. It will not take up the quota of the announcement. At least one doujinshi will get the first prize, and the other prizes will be decided by the committee according to the number of works. 4. Prizes of the book review contest. 1. Grand prize, 100,000 Chidian coins, a set of Coming Night autograph books. 2. First prize, 50,000 Chidian coins each, a set of Coming Night autograph books. 3. Second prize, 30,000 Chidian coins. 4. 10 third prizes, 10,000 Chidian coins. 5. 20 encouragement prize, 3,000 Chidian coins. 6. 1 lucky prize, a physical autograph copy of Coming Night. Apart from the grand prize and first prize winners, a lucky prize winner will be randomly selected from all the participants. After the results of the book review competition were announced, the awards would be given out on YY channel 55373. There would be a lucky draw and prizes would be given out at the venue. Via rules of the book review competition. 1. The theme of the book review is Coming Night. 2. The title of the participating book review must be prefixed with Coming Night Cup. Otherwise it will not be included. 3. All readers who like tricky works are welcome to participate in the book review. There is no limit to the number of fans, but the book review must be original and first published. 4. The venue of the competition is the review and comments section of Coming Night. Posting on behalf of others is not allowed. 5. The book review must be more than 200 words in any genre. There is no limit to the number of words in the poem. 6. There is no limit to the number of submissions for each participant, but only one book with the highest score can be awarded a third class or above award. The other submissions can be submitted for the encouragement award. Note: if there are more than 25 doujinshi works, there will be a separate selection. At that time, the same reader can use different works to win awards in both book reviews and doujinshi. 7. Participating book reviews cannot be compared with the works of other authors. 8. Spamming and malicious attacks are strictly prohibited. Such comments will not be included. 9. If you find anyone violating the rules, you can report it to the organizing committee. Once it is confirmed, the violator will be disqualified. 10. Judges can participate in the competition, but their works can only be awarded with an encouragement prize. 11. Participants can communicate with each other in the Night Cup Book Review Competition participant group to understand the grading process and to make suggestions or complaints. The book review competition participant group number is 197,983,239. Please tell us your nickname before joining the group. 6. A list of judges. Leader. Something fishy. Summary of participating book reviews. Xia, that diligent laziness. Judge requirements. The scoring must be fair and have a clear conscience. Grading rules. Grades will be given from 1 to 10 based on personal opinion. Grades can include decimal points. 7. Award method. 1. After the announcement of the list of winners, winners are requested to enter the Night Cup Book Review Competition participant group, number 197,983,239. Inform the Chidian ID and account number to the awarding staff, so that they can add the amount of Chidian coins into the account. Screenshot of the login page is required too. Physical book winners are required to inform the specific mailing address, so that they can receive the fishy signed physical book. 8. The final interpretation of the competition belongs to the Book Review Competition Organizing Committee. If there is any omission, it will be added. 9. Special thanks to all readers in YY Channel 55373 for their enthusiastic support. Night Cup Book Review Competition Organizing Committee March 30, 2013. Finally, I wish everyone the best. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 858. Many years ago, when the headmaster of the academy returned to Chang'an from his travels, he locked Ning Ke in a cliff cave in the back of the mountain. During that long period of imprisonment, Ning Ke learned many things in order to break through, including restraining the Great Spirit. That was why he thought that this cliff was nothing to him. But he forgot that the shocking array on the precipice could not only sense the fluctuation of the cultivator's psyche power and the change of the chi of heaven and earth, but it could also sense the peeping eyes. As long as someone looked at the precipice would enter that person's eyes. What was more amazing was that even if you closed your eyes and did not look at it, as long as you thought about looking at it, and did not completely suppress the idea of looking at the precipice in your consciousness, the precipice would still think that you were looking at it. It would be like a collapsing mountain, directly crashing into your eyes, and then into your brain, setting off countless huge waves. Ning Ke's eyes were instantly pierced by tens of thousands of sharp Taoist swords. He was in extreme pain, and his face became extremely pale. Then the ocean of his consciousness was hit by the cliff, setting off turbulent waves. The pain was so intense that even a strong-willed person like him could not bear it. His eyes darkened and he loosened his fingers, falling down the cliff. The cliff was shrouded in night fog. Below the clouds was a bottomless abyss. No one knew what was on the gloomy ground that never saw daylight all year round. The most important thing was that it was too high. No matter how strong the cultivators of the devil's doctrine were, they could not completely ignore the power of the earth. The empress had died after jumping off the city wall of Chang'an. Even Yu Lian, the grandmaster of the devil's doctrine, had broken all the bones in her legs after falling from the sky. The cliff Ning Ke was at was not much different from the sky. If he fell into the abyss like this, he would definitely be shocked to death by the earth. His body rubbed against the cliff, making a rustling sound. The cool night wind whistled past his ears. He fell faster and faster. The situation was extremely dangerous, and death was right below him. While falling, Ning Ke thought of many things. Not those sweet or sour memories, but the cultivation skills he had learned. He wanted to find a way to stay away from death. However, the cultivation methods of the academy and the devil's doctrine required him to use his psyche. Once he used his psyche, the shocking array on the cliff would continue to attack him. He could not bear the pain and climb up the cliff. How could he not be moved but still act accordingly? No matter how he looked at it, this seemed impossible. How could he control his body without thinking? In any case, his eyes still hurt even with his eyes closed, so he simply opened them. If he was really going to die, he would watch the world die. He stared at the rapidly ascending cliff in front of him. He did not feel any despair in his heart. Instead, he laughed at himself because of the arrival of death. The surface of the precipice wasn't smooth, but it didn't have many cracks either. As he passed by at high speed, the lines gradually turned into blurry blocks of color, as if they were about to flutter in the night wind. Ning Ke felt that he had seen such a scene before. The clothes swaying in the breeze, and the soft lines were also carved on the stone. He remembered that they were the stone statues of venerables in the temple under the Wanyan Tower in Chang'an. There were also the stone statues of venerables in the side hall of the Lang Temple. His eyes brightened slightly, and his hands that had been pressed against the cliff suddenly became gentler. It was not the gentleness of before, but a gentleness that was close to nothingness. As he fell, in the whistling night wind, he suddenly put his hands together. His right index finger bent slightly in the air, and his left index finger fell on the back of his right palm, forming a mudra. Such a gentle pair of hands, looking at the shape of his hands, could not grasp the mudra on the cliff, but it produced an extremely magical effect. His falling momentum suddenly stopped, and he suddenly stopped between the precipices. It seemed like a long time had passed, but in fact, it was only a moment. He slid down more than 100 feet along the precipice, and his feet seemed to step on the clouds that covered the stone windows. Years ago in the Length Temple, he had watched the stone statues of venerables for a night in the autumn rain, and understood the Buddhist sect's 4 emblematic gestures of fearlessness, dhyana, exorcism, and dispelling thoughts. After that, he had used it several times when fighting against the powerhouses of the Buddhism sect, because compared to the Great Spirit and the primordial 13 arrows, the emblematic gestures of the Buddhism sect were not as powerful. It was not until tonight, when he was facing the danger of life and death on the precipice, that he remembered it. His body was suspended between the precipice, and he felt that there was a very strange aura slowly swimming in the clouds below him. His sense of perception was still constantly stirring up violent waves. Without any hesitation, he closed his eyes again, and at the same time spread out his hands that were put together. He calmed his mind, and his right hand formed the dhyana, and his right hand formed the dispelling thoughts. He gently landed on the precipice, no longer looking at anything in the world, and no longer thinking about anything in the world. That night, he continued his adventure of climbing the precipice. He also waited at the stables for a whole night, but still did not see the idiot. He went again the next night, but was still disappointed. He was still disappointed on the 3rd night. By the 4th night, he had become very familiar with the shocking array on the precipice, and his mastery of the emblematic gesture of Buddhism had become more exquisite. The night journey that used to be extremely dangerous had now become a very common process. Therefore, when he walked to the east side of the stables, he even had the mood to gently hum a few songs. It was the song that the old man from the sweet potato shop in the small town hummed. Then he saw a big black horse on the pile of straw on the east side of the stables, its 4 hooves in the air, and its back kept rubbing against the straw. It looked extremely funny, and he laughed. The big black horse smelled a familiar smell. It rolled on the ground and stood up. It looked over vigilantly, and its eyes suddenly widened. It was so stiff that it seemed to have forgotten which hoof to step first. Ninkei walked over, hugged its neck, stroked its mane, and patted it hard. The big black horse opened its mouth, rolled its thick lips, and bumped his head. Ninkei let go of his hand and brushed the straw off its back. He said, "Where did you learn these dirty habits? You are not youngest uncle's donkey." The big black horse thought that its dream was to become the existence that ruled the wilderness like Mr. Donkey. It originally wanted to be the second master, but who would have thought that it would become a prison horse of the West Hill Divine Palace? Thinking of the miserable experience these days, it wanted to neigh, but did not dare. It could only open its big watery eyes and look at Ninkei, looking extremely wronged. Ninkei sighed and stroked its head. He said, "I know she has changed, and it is not because of the reason. Bear with it a little longer, and I will see if I can change her back." Hearing this, the big black horse's mood improved a little. Then, it seemed to think of something and blinked its eyes, as if it wanted Ninkei to be more ruthless. Ninkei moved closer to its ear and told it his plan. The big black horse's eyes brightened as it listened, and it nodded repeatedly. It thought to itself that Ninkei was indeed its real master, who could come up with such a shameless and lowly plan. Although the mistress was too powerful now, and Ninkei could only fail no matter how shameless he was, it was still a good thing to think about in his mind. After the discussion, Ninkei and the big black horse agreed on a time to meet again, and they parted for the time being. He walked back to the edge of the cliff, and walked down along the precipice. Now that he had mastered the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect, he could be a little distracted while climbing on the precipice. He casually glanced at the top of the Peach Mountain. This glance contained the Zen meaning of go chanting. so he was not worried that it would trigger the tactical array of the precipice. However, he forgot to go chanting, and there was a second explanation, not the kind of explanation of go chanting. So when his gaze fell on the dark divine hall of light on the peak, he could not suppress his longing for someone. There was nothing there, but he felt that he saw her. At the same time, he felt a gaze fall on him. Last night's announcement is in front. Students who did not see it can go and have a look. I will try to finish the chapter before 2:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 859. In the dead of night, the big black horse ran back to the divine hall of light. It did not dare to neigh, but kept shaking its head. The sound of its hooves was particularly brisk, and its mane wet with dew danced in the wind. Suddenly, it felt that someone was looking at it. It looked back in surprise and saw the tall and fat figure in the depths of the divine hall. Instantly, it sweated profusely, washing away the dew on its body. Sang Sang did not punish it for its disloyalty. She walked to the railing of the balcony behind the divine hall with her hands clasped behind her back. She looked at the young man, who was falling like a leaf between the cliffs in silence. The moon had been covered by clouds for several nights. The color of the mountains in the West Hill Divine Kingdom had darkened, and it was very quiet. Only the cliffs below the divine hall would occasionally make a very small sound. Except for her, no one could hear those sounds. Since the first night, she had stood by the railing and watched this scene quietly. She watched him jump from the peach blossoms to the cliffs, watched him fall dangerously, watched him climb up with difficulty, watched him wait by the east side of the stables every night, and watched him quietly return to the bottom of the cliff before dawn. She did nothing but watch in silence. Until tonight, she saw the man on the cliffs raise his head and look at the divine hall where she was. She knew he was looking at her. She knew he could not see her, but she could see something in his eyes. The thing in the man's eyes was to remove all thoughts. It was not to remove all thoughts, but to send his thoughts elsewhere. In other words, he was sending his thoughts to the balcony of the divine hall of light. She was the object of his thoughts. She was Haotian, and humans like ants were not qualified to miss her. So she thought it was disrespectful to her, or even blasphemy. The hatred and anger in her consciousness burst out uncontrollably again, just like the uncontrollably burst out of the man's eyes. The fierce wind rose from the sea of the kingdom of song thousands of miles away, whistling through the high night sky. The night clouds above the divine kingdom were shaken and uneasy, like cotton under a rope, as if they could be torn apart at any time. The peach blossoms in the mountains and fields shivered, and tens of thousands of petals were blown off by the wind. The roofs of several divine halls on the Peach Mountain, which were made of gold and jade, began to whimper. The divine hall of light was far away on the peak. Ning Ke could not see it clearly no matter how good his eyesight was. Even if he could see it clearly, it was impossible for him to see the tall and fat woman standing by the balcony railing. Moreover, in his imagination, if his surname was Luo, then the cliff would definitely be under the balcony, and the girl by the railing would naturally be thin and small. He looked at that place and smiled. He withdrew all his thoughts and confusion about his unknown fate into the depths of his sea of consciousness. He calmed his mind and continued to walk down the precipice. At this moment, a wild gust of wind howled from the sky and landed heavily on his body with the stench of seawater. He felt a thick damp coldness on his face. When it merged with the gaze he had faintly sensed earlier, it immediately destroyed the Diana state he had maintained. Without the state of Diana, Ning Ke's emblematic gesture naturally dispersed. What was even more terrifying was that no matter how calm he was in danger, even if he re-entered the state of Diana, his hands could not form emblematic gestures again. The night wind was too cold and too strong. It howled around his body violently. Every time he tried to form emblematic gestures, it would blow away his emblematic gesture. The emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect could no longer be used. Ning Ke no longer had any connection with the precipice. He was blown into the abyss by the strong wind. At this moment, he was more like a stone than a fallen leaf. The fall this time was even more terrifying than the fall on the first night. In just a breath's time, he had fallen thousands of feet between the precipice, and his speed became faster and faster. He fell into the deep night fog. Haotian no longer cared for him. In the next moment, he might be shaken out of the precipice by the precipice. Without any place to hold on to, he would directly break through the fog and fall to his death. In the face of desperation, Ning Ke made the toughest and quickest response. With a muffled groan, the great spirit in his body was released without hesitation. His hands suddenly stretched forward like two sharp knives, stabbing into the hard cliff wall. Two cracking sounds could be heard. His arm, which was as hard as iron, had cut a hole about 20 feet long in the cliff. Finally, he stopped falling and stopped on the precipice. He did not get rid of the desperate situation. Although he was holding on to the precipice tightly, he could no longer maintain the state of Buddhism sex dhyana. The shocking array on the precipice began to attack his eyes and sense of perception. He could only endure the sharp pain in his eyes and the huge waves in his sense of perception, desperately clinging to the cold precipice. Something even stranger happened. The forces that he had once sensed in the clouds and fog on the precipice swam over like snakes. In a very short period of time, they densely covered the surface of his body. Ning Ke endured the pain in his sense of perception and released his psyche power to sense. However, he could not identify what those wisps of power were. When he looked with his naked eyes, he found that they were just wisps of fog. The fog that surrounded the precipice of Peach Mountain and was responsible for sealing the U prison was naturally not a simple fog. Those wisps of fog strangely seeped into his clothes, and then continued to seep into his body. There was no blood, but he could clearly feel the pain and the clear feeling of being cut. As the wisps of fog invaded, he felt as if he was being cut by countless sharp knives. At this moment, Ning Ke's respect for the Abbey Dean in the Battle of Chong and had reached its peak, because he finally understood how it felt to be cut by thousands of knives and how painful it was. Then something even more incredible happened. As his hands went deep into the precipice that had not moved for thousands of years suddenly moved. No one could see the vibration of the precipice, not even Ning Ke, who was very close to it. No one could hear the vibration of the precipice, not even Ning Ke's ears. But his heart could hear it. The precipice vibrated in a soothing rhythm. This vibration traveled along his hands that were inserted into the wall, to his body, to his sense of perception, and finally to his heart. Ning Ke's body began to vibrate uncontrollably. His clothes were shaken so much that there seemed to be an earthquake in the depths of his sense of perception. The waves on the sea became even more ferocious. The most terrifying thing was that his heart was beating very strongly, as if it could burst into countless pieces at any time. The precipice of Peach Mountain turned into a giant war drum, vibrating silently between heaven and earth. Ning Ke, who was on the drum, no matter whether he was a fallen leaf or a stone, would be shattered by this war drum. There were two big tactical arrays on the precipice where the U prison was located. One was called Dazzling, and the other was Shocking. When they were combined, it would be shocking to the eye, and it could kill all enemies who came to it. At this moment, Ning Ke felt as if there were tens of thousands of swords stabbing into his eyes, and tens of thousands of drums beating in his body. His heart could be broken at any time. If it were not for the experience of the past few nights, he would not have been able to hold on until now. If it were not for the fact that his body was as hard as iron and stone, he would have vomited blood and died. Even so, his face became abnormally pale, and the pain was indescribable. What really made him feel unbearable was the night fog that lingered around his body. The night fog was not condensed by the chi of heaven and earth, but was refined by Haotian Taoism, with the resentment of countless prisoners who died unjustly in the U prison over the past tens of thousands of years into the tactical array that guarded the U prison. Many of the prisoners who were qualified to be imprisoned in the U prison were powerhouses with great divine sense. Their psyche power was extremely strong when they were alive, and their resentment was terrifying. After their deaths, The two merged and were cultivated by Hautian Taoism's tactical array. Every wisp of fog was a sharp blade filled with all kinds of negative emotions such as bitterness, resentment, and resentment. It was extremely powerful. Otherwise, how could someone like Wei Guangming be imprisoned for more than 10 years? No matter how strong Ning Kei's willpower was, he could barely hold on under the shocking pain. But he could not withstand the cutting of these thousands of blades of evil aura. After all, he was not the invincible Abby Dean. His heart beat faster and faster, and the precipice in front of him became more and more blurry. More and more blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His consciousness became more and more blurred, but the pain was still so clear. He could not hold on any longer. Just as he was about to pull his hands out from the precipice and escape from this terrifying precipice and cloud at the cost of his life, a ray of light suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. He thought that he was hallucinating, but the next moment, he found that it was not. The cold and dark precipice in front of him really became bright. The night clouds above Peach Mountain were blown away by the hurricane from the storm sea thousands of miles away, revealing the full moon. The silver moonlight shone on the mountains, on the precipice, and on him. On the edge of the balcony of the Divine Hall of Light, Sang Sang looked at the bright moon in the night sky with her hands behind her back. Her ordinary face looked a little pale, perhaps due to weakness or other reasons. The moonlight did not have any heat, but when it shone on Ning Kei, he felt warmth seeping into his body from the surface of his skin. Even his wildly beating heart became much calmer. The clouds around the precipice were dispersed by the moonlight. He took advantage of this fleeting opportunity to calm down and re-enter the state of dhyana. His right hand formed the Taoist emblematic gesture, and he was ready to leave. At this moment, he suddenly saw the stone window on the precipice beside him. He had seen this stone window on the opposite precipice that day, but the precipice was shrouded in clouds from time to time, and there was a tactical array to hide it, so he did not observe it carefully. At this moment, the clouds were dispersed by the moonlight, and he re-entered the state of dhyana. He saw the stone window and the person in it. At this moment, Ning Kei should have left this terrifying precipice as soon as possible. But looking at the stone window, he knew that he could not leave, because the person in the stone window was a young fat man. Perhaps it was because the food in the U prison was good that the person's cheeks, which had become thinner, became round again. He looked at Ning Kei outside the stone window, and was so shocked that he could not speak. His eyes were still so clean, and his expression was still so amiable. When he was shocked, he was still the same as before, and his mouth was so big that it could swallow Tang Xiaotong's fist. About the role contest. I don't know why Yi Hongyu was placed as the best actor. I will go and ask tomorrow. As for the photo, Sang Sang really cannot find a suitable photo. Now, I have written Sang Sang according to AI Xiaoqi. Yes, of course she is fatter than her, and she does not look as delicate. Now Sang Sang is just a tall, white and fat ordinary girl. Please remember, there will still be 2 chapters tomorrow, but the update will still be late. Please vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 860. Ning Kei would never have imagined that he would see Chen Pippi's annoying face in the precipice. He and his senior brothers and sisters in the academy all thought that Chen Pippi had brought the Abbey Dean back to the Jisho Abbey. They would never have imagined that he would be locked up in the precipice and become a prisoner in the U prison of the West Hill Divine Palace. Chen Pippi would never have imagined that he could see Ning Kei's annoying face in the light outside the stone window, where the scenery never changed. He looked dull, but he was actually extremely smart. He had long predicted that Ning Kei would become a prisoner of Chang'an City, but he did not expect that this guy would be so bold as to come to the West Hill Divine Palace and appear in front of him. This was a reunion that no one had expected. The 2 brothers stared at each other through the stone window. They were stunned for a long time, and then they began to laugh foolishly. The cell was very simple. There was only a bed and some tools. Ning-Ke looked inside through the stone window and found that it was dry, and there were no bloodstains. There was food and water on the small table. He felt slightly relieved. Then he began to observe the stone window. This encounter was too sudden. The academy did not know that Chinpipi was locked up in the U prison and did not have any plans. But now that he had seen it, there was no need to hesitate. He prepared to rescue Chinpipi from the U prison without hesitation. As he observed, his expression became solemn. It was not because the clouds dispersed by the moonlight were cutting his body again, but because he found that it was indeed very difficult. The stone window was very small and could only see the sky. Even bigger birds could not fly in. If he wanted to rescue Chinpipi from the cell, he had to pry the stone window open. However, when he stretched out his hand, he was blocked. He was shocked to find that the precipice was a hole. The stone window was a small hole in the precipice. If he wanted to pry open the stone window, he would have to pry open the entire precipice of Peach Mountain. There was an extremely powerful tactical array hidden in the mountain. It was very likely to be a confinement. How could it be done? The West Hill Divine Palace's Dharma access was so powerful, other than the headmaster of the academy, who could pry open this Peach Mountain with countless talismans. After all, even Wei Guangming, the first person to successfully escape from the U prison in countless years, did not dare to pry open the stone window. Instead, he chose to push down the wooden sticks in front of him. Ning-Ke said, "It seems that you have to stay inside for 2 more days. I need to think of a way." Chinpipi stood by the stone window, somewhat perplexed, and did not respond. Ning-Ke then remembered that he did not hear Chinpipi's laughter when they looked at each other and laughed. He thought of a possibility and slowed down to ask, "You can't hear it?" Chinpipi looked at his lips, nodded, and said something. Ning-Ke understood the words from the movement of his lips. "Nothing but light can enter this window." Ning-Ke thought for a while, and was about to say something when Chinpipi suddenly showed an anxious expression on his face. His lips moved slightly, and he kept saying something. He understood the names of Sang Sang and Tang Xiaotang. He understood what Chinpipi wanted to say. He nodded to indicate that he already knew what had happened to Sang Sang. Then he told him that Tang Xiaotang was at the back of the mountain of the academy, and that there was no need to worry. The moonlight fell from the night sky, falling on the precipice and on Ning Quebec. Some rays of light passed through the narrow stone window and fell on Chinpipi's face. The two talked silently. "Wait for me to get you out," Ning-Ke said while looking at Chinpipi's eyes. He spoke very slowly, and his pronunciation was very accurate. He made sure that Chinpipi could understand every word he said and feel his determination. Chinpipi looked at him quietly, and suddenly laughed and shook his head. Ning-Ke looked at the smile on his face and slowly stuck out his middle finger. He said, "You are now a prisoner. You have no choice but to wait passively for me to save you." After saying this, he looked at his middle finger bathed in the moonlight. He was puzzled. How could he be so safe on the precipice, with only the emblematic gesture of meditation left on his left hand? In the moonlight, Ning-Ke reached out to the stone window and triggered the inhibition of the U prison. The divine halls of West Hill knew that someone had approached the U prison and began to be vigilant. The black-robed deacons of the judicial department were everywhere on the 3 cliff plateaus of Peach Mountain. But no one had found the Revelation Institute at the foot of the mountain. Ning-Ke was not worried that they would find him. The peach blossoms on the mountainside were his best shield. As long as the divine halls did not think that someone could pass through the peach blossoms, they would not look down the mountain with suspicion. Other than thinking about how to save Chinpipi from the heavily guarded U prison, what made him feel inexplicably cold was the cold gaze that fell from the peak that night. He was sure that there was no one in the divine halls on the peak at that time, but he did not know why he felt that someone had been watching him. Whose cold gaze did it belong to? He admitted that courage was very important in a battle, but it could not fundamentally determine victory or defeat. That was why he could not leave Chang'an with courage alone. The academy had made detailed arrangements in advance. His hiding in the divine hall was an important part of the plan. If that cold gaze was really as he had guessed, then it would not affect the Academy's plan at all. The real impact was still on Chunpipi. Haotian's world was so stable, as if it would never change. But in the human world, which was made up of countless trivial details, change was the norm. The Academy's plan had to be adjusted accordingly after he saw Chunpipi's face between the cliffs. They might even have to start from scratch. Ning Ke could not understand why the West Hill Divine Palace would lock Chunpipi in the U prison. Even if the Abbey Dean was dead, and the Jisho Abbey could not continue to control the West Hill Divine Palace behind the scenes, and even if Chunpipi's identity as a disciple of the Academy was unacceptable to Haotian Taoism, it was still so unbelievable to secretly imprison someone of Chunpipi's status. Were the bigwigs in the Divine Hall not afraid that Haotian Taoism would split because of this? In the middle of the night, Ning Ke once again followed the path through the peach blossoms to the cliff. However, the clouds were thick tonight, and the moonlight could not shine on the human world. Clouds and mist lingered below the cliff. Thinking of the pain he had suffered last night, and the hatred in the mist, he did not dare to go down. It was the same for the next few nights. He could not see Chunpipi. After that, Ning Ke used the Great Spirit to heal the internal injuries he had suffered on the cliff. He flipped through countless old classics and tried to find a feasible method. Then, he began to observe the moon every night. Since light could enter through the narrow stone window, so could the images. He did not want to act like a fool with Chunpipi between the cliffs, so he began to write letters. Ning Ke dipped his brush in ink and left clear and beautiful handwriting on the snow-white paper. He sat behind the desk and kept writing. He wrote about the Academy's plan and his own thoughts without leaving anything out. At the end of the letter, he even talked about the things that happened in the back of the mountain and asked if the food in the U prison was really that good. In the garden in front of the Revelation Institute, Long Qing and the flower addict Lu Chenjiao were also watching the moon. Lu Chenjiao was still as beautiful as ever, like a beautiful flower. However, her petals were stained with water, making her look a little cold. She was no longer as beautiful as she used to be. Long Qing wore a silver mask on his face. Now no one could see the face under the mask. The beautiful face that had once captivated countless girls in the world was only a memory. I don't know when it started to become a habit to eat sweet potatoes in midsummer. I heard that this habit has been maintained in the Divine Hall for thousands of years. Habits are indeed powerful. Long Qing looked at the half-sweet potato in his hand. His lips that were exposed under the silver mask curled up slightly. He said calmly, "I just did not expect that it would be so easy to form a new habit." Lu Chenjia looked at the scar below his lips, and her expression darkened. She thought that it was not terrible to get used to failure, but it was more depressing to forget the old habits. Were we so unfamiliar when we were in front of flowers and under the stars? After the war against the Tang Empire, Long Qing returned to the West Hill Divine Palace and found that everything had changed. He used to be the priest of the Divine Hall of Judgment. However, the person sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was Yi Hongyu. How could he return to the Divine Hall of Judgment? Moreover, he had been convicted of apostasy. Although the Abbey Dean had cleared his name, many people in the Divine Hall looked at him with mixed feelings after the Abbey Dean's crushing defeat in Chang'an. The West Hill Divine Palace had suffered heavy losses in this war. As a powerhouse in the Upper Knowing Destiny state, he should have been more respected. With his seniority and state in Haotian Taoism, even Yi Hongyu and his past crimes could not affect his position. He believed that no one would object if he were to directly take over as the great divine priest of revelation. However, everyone knew that he had encountered the black wind in the south of Chang'an. His proud state had been shattered by the blade and tent in the wind, and he was still badly injured when he returned to the Divine Hall. No one believed that he could climb back up from the abyss of despair and return to the peak, like he did, after he was crippled by Ning Quebec. Just as Lu Chenjia had thought, failure was not scary. However, how could he withstand such a heavy blow when he had been defeated so many times that it had become a habit? If the new emperor of the Yin Kingdom, Chong Ming, had not sent a lot of benefits to the Divine Hall, and had firmly expressed his support for him, And if he had not controlled the tens of thousands of elite cavalries in the eastern wilderness, he might not even be able to keep his position as the Minister of Offerings in the Revelation Institute, let alone the great divine priest of Revelation. I am not talking about getting used to losing to Ning Quebec. I am talking about everyone in the Divine Hall. They have only used half a year to get used to the moon above their heads. Long Qing looked at the moon that had broken through the thick clouds in the night sky and said, "The peach blossoms that had not bloomed for decades suddenly bloomed again this year, and have not withered since. People have actually gotten used to such a magical thing. No one has ever looked at the mountain full of peach blossoms and asked why." His gaze fell on the divine hall of light on the peak and said, "I want to ask. There is one more chapter. Try to finish it before 3:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me." Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 861. The lights in the divine hall of light went out, and the peach blossoms all over the mountain bloomed. Even though the hierarch lord had not been seen since he returned from the academy, everyone knew that he had sustained irrecoverable injuries. However, on the day the peach blossoms bloomed, the hierarch's sacred sedan reappeared. Everyone looked at the shining figure behind the veil and realized that his injuries had all healed. He was even more powerful than before. Since spring, many changes had taken place in the West Hill Divine Palace. However, no one seemed to have noticed it. Some people could not sense such changes, while others did not dare to. These things can only be guessed but cannot be guessed. That is why the process has become interesting. The people in the Divine Hall are all smart, truly smart. That is why they will not die because they are smart. Long Qing looked at Lu Chenjia and said, "Some things can be guessed, and I want to confirm it. I need to go to the U prison, now that the Divine Hall of Judgment has their eyes on me, and Yi Hongyu has killed all my people. I have no chance. However, you are different. I want to ask you for help." His expression and tone were much gentler than before. He was no longer as arrogant and cold. However, it sounded cold to Lu Chenjia's ears because there was politeness in it. "What's different about me?" she asked. Long Qing looked at the divine hall of light and said, "It is said that she was beside the great divine priest of Revelation before he died. She went to see the hierarch, and the hierarch's blind eyes were healed. However, the peach blossoms have bloomed for such a long time, and she has never entered the divine hall of judgment. She has never seen Yi Hongyu." Lu Chenjia said, "What are you trying to say?" Long Qing said, "If I am not wrong, the person in the divine hall of light is really her. You used to have a bad relationship with Ning Ke, but now you have an advantage. As long as the two girls in white in the divine hall say something, you can help me. Even Yi Hongyu will not dare to stop you." Lu Chenjia lowered her head and asked, "Why?" Long Qing said, "Because she knows that helping you is helping me. She will do anything that will make the academy and Ning Ke unhappy, because this is what she hates the most." Lu Chenjia said, "Why don't you go to the divine hall of light directly? Everyone knows that you are the one who hates Ning Ke the most in the human world." After a moment of silence, Long Qing said, "I dare not take the risk because she used to hate me." Lu Chenjia looked into his eyes and said, "You just said that smart people die easily because they are smart. Mortals speculate about heaven's will. This is also a risk." Long Qing said, "There are some things that we have to do even if we die." Lu Chenjia looked at the flowers in front of her and asked, "When?" Long Qing said, "The sooner the better, because I don't have much time." Lu Chenjia said, "I like that you are so honest with me, so I will do it. But I still don't understand why you want to enter the U prison." Long Qing said, "I want to see someone." Lu Chenjia asked, "Why?" Long Qing said, "I have been to the Jisho Abbey. The gate is closed." Lu Chenjia looked at his face and said in a trembling voice, "You still haven't given up?" Long Qing said calmly, "If I give up so easily, How can I be worthy of the hardships I've suffered over the years and the countless times I didn't give up in desperate situations? Lu Qinjia felt the aura coming from his body and knew that he had obtained true peace. She could not understand why a man who was so calm would still be so stubborn. A calm heart does not mean a dead heart. Long Qing looked at his chest, under the black divine robe. There was a hole there. There was no heart inside, only a black peach blossom. When the mountain of peach blossoms bloomed, the black peach blossom in his chest, that had almost withered in the south of Chang, and miraculously recovered. He felt that this was a sign from Haotian. He looked in the direction of the divine hall of light and said calmly, I have thought too much in the past. My Taoist heart is firm but mottled. Those mottled spots are the traces of shadows. Just like the dreams I entered when I climbed the mountain in the academy. I saw light and darkness, but I could not figure out where I should stand. Now, I just want to heal my injuries and have a fair fight with Ning Quebec. I want to see who Haotian has chosen. Even if Haotian did not choose me, I can't not choose myself. The bright moon shone on the trees of the Revelation Institute, and the peach blossoms all over the mountain. Ning Ke stood at the edge of the cliff in front of the flowers, and looked at the full moon in the night sky. After confirming that there would be no clouds tonight, he jumped to the opposite cliff. He used the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect to stop thinking about the array and tent coming from the cliff. Then, he slowly loosened his right hand, and grabbed the rope hanging from the cliff. The rope was very long and strong. One end of it was tied to the neck of the big black horse on the cliff platform above the precipice, while the other end was tied tightly to Ning Ke's waist on the precipice. He pulled the rope gently, and sent a signal to the plateau high above. The big black horse felt the vibration from the rope, and slowly walked to the edge of the cliff. Ning Ke fell down the cliff. With the moonlight, the clouds that shrouded the U prison were much lower, revealing the stone windows that looked like ant nests. Ning Ke came to the cell where Chun Pippi was, and pulled the rope again. The big black horse did not continue forward. Ning Ke was worried that he would be swallowed by the clouds and fall to his death. Now that he was tied by the big black horse, he should be at ease. But looking at the clouds not far below his feet, his heart still palpitated. He did not dare to look at his feet, and looked directly at the stone window. Chun Pippi looked at him with a smile in the stone window. Only light could pass through the stone window. Even if someone were to use the blood-colored giant knife to chisel the stone on the cliff, the sound would not be able to enter the cell. Chun Pippi could immediately find Ning Ke outside the stone window. It was not because he had a telepathic connection with Ning Ke, nor was it because he could predict. It was because he had been looking outside the window. To be more precise, in these few days he ate, bathed and farted, but he did not sleep much. He had been looking outside the stone window all the time. The deacon in the U prison thought that he had gone crazy from being locked up, and was staring at the unchanging blue sky. In fact, he was just waiting for Ning Quebec. He knew that Ning Ke would definitely come, but he did not know when. So, he could only keep looking outside the stone window to make sure that he would not miss it. Ning Ke took out the letter that he had written from his chest, and laid it flat in front of the stone window. Chun Pippi looked at the tiny words on the paper with the light of the oil lamp in the cell, and frowned slightly. He was indeed the only genius in the academy, who had 6 A+ courses. He had memorized the contents of the letter after a few casual glances. It would not be difficult for him to recite the contents of the letter. Ning Ke put the paper back into his chest and asked silently with a smile, "Isn't it awesome?" It was only then that Chun Pippi knew that this was the academy's plan. He could not help but feel that it was ridiculous. But when he thought about it carefully, he felt that it was very reasonable. But in the end he still shook his head. It had nothing to do with the academy's plan. He just did not agree with Ning Ke's addition of saving him from the U prison. The more reasonable the academy's plan was, the more he could not accept that he would disrupt it. Seeing him shake his head, Ning Ke did not say anything, and directly raised his middle finger. Chun Pippi still shook his head, and used his finger to write some words in the air. Ning Ke looked at these words and frowned slightly. He did not understand why he mentioned her. He stretched out his finger, and wrote a dirty word in the air outside the window. Chun Pippi was a little angry and used his finger to write an even more dirty word. Ning Ke was not angry. The scene at this moment reminded him of the past, when he had just entered the academy. He could not help but laugh at the fat man's words in the old library. Time passed so silently and disappeared without a trace. Who would have thought that after so many years, he and Chun Pippi would both come to Peach Mountain and start to communicate again inside and outside the precipice. Chun Pippi probably also remembered the past. He smiled silently and said, "The food in the U prison is really delicious. If you are interested, you can come in and try it." At this moment, he suddenly heard the sound of the door opening behind him. Then someone walked into the cell. The smile on his face suddenly disappeared, and he raised his eyebrows at Ning Ke outside the window. Ning Ke understood and quickly moved to the side of the precipice. After ensuring that due to the angle of the light, the people in the cell could not see him outside the stone window, he looked at the cell again. When he saw the person who walked into the cell, he could not help but be a little surprised. He did not understand why this person would appear. Chun Pippi had not seen the man who walked into the cell, if he did not remember wrongly, but he recognized the silver mask, so he was also a little surprised and puzzled. "If I am not wrong, you should be very low-key in the West Hill Divine Palace now. Why would you break the taboo to see me? And how did you know that I was locked up here? Don't tell me that you have a trusted aide in the judicial department. I know how cold-blooded and powerful that woman is." Long Qing looked at the fat man by the window and said, "You are indeed a genius of Haotian Taoism. You are locked up in the U prison, but you seem to be able to see everything that happens outside. Unfortunately, you are just a piece of trash now." Chun Pippi said, "Although I have always been good-tempered, I do have a temper. Even a blind man can see that you are not qualified to call me a piece of trash." Long Qing smiled and said, "Your snow mountain and ocean of chi have been destroyed. What else can you be if not a piece of trash?" Chun Pippi's expression did not change. He said with a smile, "Even a piece of trash like you can cultivate again after being pierced by Ning Ke's arrow. Do you think that I, the genius, cannot do it?" Long Qing said, "Even if you can cultivate again, you are still a piece of trash." Chun Pippi sighed and said, "It seems that you have been bullied by Ning Ke into a childish disease." Long Qing said, "There is indeed no need to continue such a childish conversation. You are about to be burned to death by the holy fire in the right to light. Why should I humiliate you? I still want to hear why you call me a piece of trash." Chun Pippi's expression changed slightly as he stood in front of Long Qing and said, he wanted to block this person from Ning Ke, who was outside the window, and not hear what he was saying. However, his action was too late. Ning Ke heard Long Qing's words clearly. The right to light was the grandest ceremony of the West Hill Divine Palace. It definitely required the highest level of sacrifice. Until today, no one knew what the sacrifice was. Ning Ke only knew tonight that Chun Pippi was the sacrifice for the right to light. What awaited him was the endless burning of the holiest Haotian divine light, and the most complete death. This sacrifice is really expensive and heavy. Looking at Chun Pippi's broad back in the cell, Ning Ke smiled and thought. Then, he silently cursed the wife of the Grand Secretary Zheng Jing as the most shameless whore in the world. This is chapter 27. By the way, I'll talk about the 27 cups of wine again. The original text of the 6th cup of wine was "The stone path bends, and at the end there is a girl." When I was writing it, I forgot this line. Later on, when I looked at the newly written line about the mountain ghost, I found that the meaning was actually the same. I couldn't help but be somewhat stunned. After 2.5 years, the story or sentence I wanted to write still had some similarities. It was said that authors should try their best to be innovative and change when writing stories. I was indeed trying my best, but now that I thought about it, there were some parts that were really difficult to change. It was probably because I liked the story too much. What I could promise was that I would do my best to write a different plot, and I would do my best to write the details better, just like I did recently. Everyone, please continue to cast your recommendation votes. Good night and good health. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chitian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 862. Why do I call you trash? Long Qing did not know that Chen Pippi casually asked this question to block Ning Kei's sight. He said, "Back then, I was regarded as the divine son of West Hill by the world. It seemed that I was highly valued, but in fact, I always knew that in the eyes of the elders in the West Hill Divine Palace, the future of Haotian Taoism was always on you. Compared to you, I'm nothing, and I believe that in your eyes, I've never existed." This sentence was very true. In the eyes of the deacons and priests of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace, and in the eyes of ordinary believers, Long Qing was the most dazzling person. There were so many Haotian believers in countless Taoist temples, but only a few of them had heard of Long Qing. However, in the eyes of the cultivators who truly understood the secrets of Haotian Taoism, only Chen Pippi was qualified to represent the future of Haotian Taoism. This was because he came from the Jishou Abbey and inherited the Abbey Dean's Taoism skills or bloodline. He had been regarded as a rare genius since he was a child. He could only be compared to the direct descendants of the Academy or the Xiankong Temple. After he was accepted as a disciple of the headmaster of the Academy, this was no longer necessary. Compared with Chen Pippi, who was born with the favor of Haotian, no matter how talented Long Qing was, he was too ordinary. No matter how noble Long Qing's bloodline was, he was still inferior. A few years ago, Long Qing entered Chang, and with the intention of entering the second floor of the academy, Ning Kei once asked Chen Pippi about him. At that time, Long Qing was very famous in the world, but Chen Pippi did not care about him at all. The difference between the two was too big, and it was really hard for him to pay attention to Long Qing. "You are not Yi Hong Yu. I don't think I need to pay attention to you." Chen Pippi looked at Long Qing and said. Long Qing said, "You are a peerless genius of Haotian Taoism, and I am just a prince in the mortal world. Naturally, you don't need to pay attention to me. Furthermore, you are indeed the youngest person in the cultivation world to enter the knowing destiny state. However, what puzzles me and makes me laugh is that you have stagnated since then. Not to mention that Yi Hong Yu has far surpassed you. You are not even as good as me in terms of states." He possessed an incredible bloodline and experience, and possessed the publicly recognized talent of the Taoist sect. But in the end, he became such a mediocre person. How could it be explained by saying that he was not as good as he was when he was young? This only proves that there's something wrong with your temperament. No matter how much talent you have, you're still trash in the end. Chen Pippi smiled but did not say anything. Long Qing's pale cheeks flushed. He stared into his eyes and said, "I don't understand. Even I can see that there is something wrong with your temperament. Why couldn't those predecessors of Haotian Taoism see it? Why couldn't the Abbey Dean see it? Why couldn't the headmaster see it? Why are you still qualified to be locked up in the U prison so solemnly, when you have already become a real waste? Why is it that a useless person like you is qualified to be a sacrifice for the right to light? A sacrifice that Haotian wants." Chen Pippi found it funny and said, "I don't think it's an honor for the sacrifice to be burned to death in the right to light. If you think I'm not qualified, please talk to the hierarch quickly." Long Qing suddenly realized that he had lost control of his emotions just now. Looking at this person's amiable face, he did not know why he had spoken out his true feelings. His expression could not help but turn cold. "Even if I'm trash, I don't want to hear too much nonsense." Chen Pippi looked at him and spread out his hands. "You must have spent a lot of effort to enter the U prison. Did you just want to vent your hatred and jealousy? I don't remember meeting you when I was young. If you have any childhood trauma, I can't take responsibility. Look at that woman. She has never taken responsibility for me." Long Qing had already calmed down. He looked at him and said, "I admit that I am a little jealous of you, because your cultivation career has been too smooth. People like me have to put in a lot of effort, and even suffer a lot to get to where I am now. But you have only reincarnated into a good body and met a good teacher. You can easily get to where you are now. I can't help but be jealous. Pippi comforted him and said, Don't think too much about it. I don't want this either. Longqing looked at the smile on his face and raised his eyebrows slightly. He continued, Other than jealousy, I am more angry. I am angry that my teacher has such an unfilial descendant like you. It was only then that Pippi remembered that he was his father's disciple. After a moment of silence, he said, In Chang'an, I have done my best for the academy. Outside the city, I have done my best for my father. I have never owed anyone. Longqing stared into his eyes and said, My teacher is in a very bad situation now. He is even worse than an ordinary person and needs someone to take care of him. If you can't be filial, then I hope you can help me. Pippi was puzzled and asked, How do you want me to help you? Longqing said, I went back to the Jishou Abbey, but I couldn't get in. Pippi said helplessly, Sometimes this world has to be reasonable. You can't call me trash so many times and make me really trash. Then, I'll be so idiotic as to believe what you say. Longqing said, My teacher needs someone to take care of him now. Pippi said, He is the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey. He is supported by countless countries in the human world. Why would he need someone to take care of him? Longqing said, You know what I mean by taking care of him. Pippi's eyelids drooped slightly and he said, If Haotian does not speak, no one in Haotian Taoism would dare to disrespect the Jishou Abbey. Longqing found that Pippi was indeed very smart. Although he was inexperienced, he knew exactly what he wanted to say, as if he could see the deepest part of his heart. Longqing could not help but be vigilant. Any order depends on strength. The reason why the Jishou Abbey can control the West Hill Divine Palace behind the scenes and influence the direction of the world for countless years is because of this. The Green Mountain Anthill was trampled by the headmaster. The strongest power in the abbey dissipated like smoke. The headmaster was seriously injured. It was extremely difficult for the Jishou Abbey to influence Haotian Taoism, not to mention control the Divine Hall. The thousands of Taoist temples and Haotian believers in the human world only knew about the West Hill Divine Palace. How would they know about the existence of Jishou Abbey? Under such circumstances, even if Haotian didn't say anything, did you think that the West Hill Divine Palace, which had been suppressed for countless years, wouldn't have some ideas? Do you think the Lord Headmaster is willing to remember the days when he was teacher's dog? If there is no one to take care of him, can the grass huts by the lake withstand the wind and rain? Longqing looked at Pippi and said honestly, I know that my current state and strength is not enough to restore the Jishou Abbey to its former glory. But whether it is my brother Chong Ming of the Yin Kingdom, or the cavalry of the wilderness, they can all give me strength. Otherwise, I would have been forced to leave Peach Mountain long ago. I think this should be some kind of proof. Pippi looked at his eyes quietly and said, He was seriously injured in Chang'an City. His state and cultivation are all gone. Even if Haotian takes pity on him, he can't save him. Longqing understood that Pippi's words were to remind him that if he went to the Jishou Abbey to use the Grey Eye's skill to seize the Abbey Dean's power, it was destined to be in vain. A faint chill rose. He felt that Pippi's seemingly simple eyes suddenly became extremely complicated. Then, it seemed to fall into the deepest part of his soul. He could only remain silent. 7 in and 13 out, Pippi suddenly said. Longqing was slightly stunned and asked, What do you mean? Pippi looked at him and said with a smile, This is the way to enter the abbey. If you can't understand this sentence, it can only mean that you will never be able to catch up with a useless person like me. Longqing got the answer he wanted and left the cell. Pippi turned around and looked out of the stone window. Ning Kei's face appeared outside the window. He looked at Pippi and asked a few words silently. Pippi smiled and shook his head. Ning Kei raised his middle finger again. Pippi refused to say another word. He turned around and faced Ning Kei with his broad back and butt. Then he raised his right hand high above his head and raised his middle finger. Ning Kei stood on the precipice, and looked at the back of his senior brother through the stone window. He was silent for a long time and pulled the rope. The big black horse on the cliff above felt the movement of the rope and retreated. Ning Ke followed it on the precipice and gradually separated from the stone window. The right to light was the grandest and highest standard sacrificial ceremony of Haotian Taoism. It could only be held when Haotian sent a miracle to the human world. The human world had not seen Haotian's miracle for many years, so the right to light had not been held for many years. Even the most knowledgeable priest of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace was not very clear about the requirements and process of the sacrificial ceremony. Ning Ke had no knowledge in this area. After leaving the U prison on the precipice and returning to the Revelation Institute, he stayed in the book hall to read the classics. Finally, he found some relevant content in an extremely thick book about the ceremony and confirmed that the right to light did require sacrifices. Those sacrifices could be a sword, a sheep, or a blade of grass. However, these sacrifices must contain the purest faith. Sometimes they were even the original objects of Haotian's miracle, so they were extremely rare. As time passed, the shadow of the everlasting night slowly approached. The faith in the world of Haotian gradually showed signs of decline. It was extremely difficult to find such a sacrifice. If one looked at the requirements of the sacrifice, the sword of the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, might be the most suitable. However, the faith of the strongest man in the world towards Haotian was a shallow question mark. Perhaps the old yellow bull of the academy was qualified, but the West Hill Divine Palace did not dare to have such ambitions. Ning Ke collected a lot of information through various channels and finally confirmed that the sacrifice for the right to light was indeed Chun Pipi. According to the secret rumors, the reason why the West Hill Divine Palace used him as a sacrifice was not only because he was a recognized genius of Haotian Taoism and a disciple of the second floor of the academy. The most important thing was that his father was the Abbey Dean of the Jisho Abbey. His mother was the descendant of the great divine priest of light, who had left Peach Mountain for the South Sea 600 years ago and disappeared. The identity of the successor of the academy meant that he had betrayed Haotian. However, he had the noblest blood of Haotian Taoism in the world. Was there a more suitable sacrifice than such a pure traitor? Moreover, the West Hill Divine Palace thought that when the Peach Mountain was set on fire and Chun Pipi was about to be burned to ashes, could the academy turn a blind eye? Could Ning Ke continue to sit in Chang'an peacefully? Ning Ke felt a chill when he imagined the fat man being burned to ashes. He looked at the divine hall of light on the peak and thought, "Do you really want him to die? Do you really want me to die?" The plot is a bit awkward. I discussed it with my friends for a long time. Then I thought hard in the wind for a long time when I was walking the dog. I am very happy that I have figured it out. I will resume 2 chapters tomorrow. Have a good weekend and enjoy your reading. I am very happy now. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 863. If Ning Ke, who was in the Peach Mountain, could find out what the sacrifice for the right to light was, the Tang Empire, which had countless intelligence systems, naturally knew about it too, or even before him. But now he could only think about how to deal with the right to light by himself. He had basically confirmed that the news was deliberately released by the West Hill Divine Palace. The Divine Hall wanted to force the people from the academy, especially him, out of Chang'an, because the Divine Hall always thought that he was still in Chang'an, which was a problem the Divine Hall could not solve. The reason why he was so angry at the Divine Hall of Light was because he was very sure that it was the woman in the Divine Hall of Light who had chosen Chun Pipi. The right to light was for Haotian, and since Haotian was in the human world now, it was up to Haotian to decide the sacrifice. Ning Ke had mixed feelings. Many years ago, after killing Yin Suqing, he was attacked by the Vermilion Bird Talisman on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. Thanks to the protection of the big black umbrella, he did not die on the spot. If not for Chun Pipi's help after escaping into the old library of the academy, and eating a precious heavenly power pill. He would not have survived. Luckily, his snow mountain and ocean of chi were rebuilt, and the loser who could not cultivate finally set foot on the road of cultivation. In other words, Chinpipi had really changed his fate. Although he did not say anything in the following days, he had never forgotten about it. He had specially told Sangsang to remember that he owed Chinpipi his life. The reason was that he valued this matter very much, and was afraid that he would forget it. So he asked Sangsang, who never forgot important things, to remember it for him. But now it seemed that she had long forgotten about it. That night, Ning Ke sneaked down the precipice again, and scolded the woman in the divine hall of light by the stone window, to show his firm stand on the matter of clothes and limbs. Then he took out the revised plan during the day, and kept explaining to the stone window. But he had to stop after a short while. Because Chinpipi did not want to listen, he did not even turn around. He only faced Ning Ke's pale face outside the stone window. Since he could not see Ning Ke's mouth and the words on the letter, he naturally could not hear it. Chinpipi expressed his firm objection with silence. His snow mountain and ocean of chi had been locked. In Longqing's words, he had become a waste. Then why should his senior brothers and sisters at the back of the mountain of the academy take risks for him? Why should he let his junior brother Ning Ke risk his life for him? Ning Ke looked at his broad back. After a moment of silence, he once again stuck out his middle finger and said in a hoarse voice, "Do you think it looks good to burn you into a pile of fat?" Ning Ke could use the skills of the Buddhism sect that he had learned from Master Qishan, and the moonlight sprinkled by his teacher, to deal with the tactical array on the precipice. However, with his current cultivation state, it was impossible to break the precipice and rescue Chinpipi from the U prison. When Chinpipi turned around, he could not even make him listen to him. Therefore, if he did not want to see Chinpipi die, he had to choose another method. No matter where they were, the disciples of the academy would always ask for help when they encountered an unsolvable problem. Because to them, the academy was like Haotian to the believers. It seemed omniscient and omnipotent. Although Ning Ke and the others had become the source of the academy's confidence after the headmaster of the academy ascended to heaven, he still wanted the opinions of his senior brothers out of habit. Ning Ke left the Revelation Institute and walked across the stone bridge over the stream. He came back to the small town and handed the letter to the old sweet potato seller to the old man, hoping to get a reply as soon as possible. "I don't know what you are going to do. Just be careful," the old sweet potato seller said. Ning Ke said, "Since I have come to Peach Mountain, I have never thought of going back alive. Or rather, I have never thought of going back alone. And I don't believe that anything will happen to me." After finishing his business, he held 2 sweet potatoes and walked out of the town. The sweet potatoes had just come out of the oven and were extremely hot. Although he was not afraid of the heat, he kept changing his hands to avoid attracting attention. It looked a little funny. A horse carriage came. He looked at the girl in white in front of the carriage and remembered that he had met this carriage on the day of the thunderstorm. After passing by, he subconsciously looked back and saw that the girl in the carriage was still tall and fat. He could not help but have some malicious guesses and felt inexplicably happy. In the middle of the night, he dived to the bottom of the cliff again. The big black horse was still doing hard work on the cliff plateau. He hung in front of the stone window and kept trying to persuade Chinpipi in the cell. However, Chinpipi still did not turn around. Since he could not hear the sound, Chinpipi could completely ignore him. The most important thing to be a man is to have confidence. "I know what you are worried about. But what's there to worry about? The headmaster is looking at us from heaven. You don't even dare to try. Aren't you afraid that you will anger the old man to death? What if he is fighting with Haotian when he is angry and gets beaten up by Haotian when he is distracted?" The headmaster said that you can easily enter the knowing destiny state because you are optimistic. But where is your optimism now? Is it because you are fat again that you feel inferior? Is that why you don't want to see others? You are so useless. I saw a rich girl these days. She is not married yet, but she is fatter than you, taller than second brother. She looks like she is pregnant before marriage. But how can she feel inferior at all? She wandered around the world with her maidservant all day long. She bought a lot of high-calorie food like roasted sweet potatoes. That is a lot of them. Do you know how many there are? Even the starving people in Hebei County can be fed like pigs. But she just doesn't care at all. Look at what kind of style is that. That is confidence. Dangerous clouds and mist floated between the quiet cliffs. Ning Ke climbed the stone window like a herbalist and talked earnestly to the window. Although Chun Pippi still refused to turn around and could not hear what he said, he became more and more excited. He could not help but laugh when he thought of the fat girl. There were no traces of human beings between the cliffs for thousands of years. The West Hill Divine Palace did not have any surveillance here, so he could speak freely. Even if his voice was carried by the wind, it was even softer than the rustling of leaves when it reached the divine halls on the peak. Even the powerhouses above the 5 states could not hear it. So Ning Ke was very relieved. But he had long forgotten that the woman in the divine hall of light was not human. Sang Sang stood on the balcony behind the divine hall of light, looking at the ridiculous scene in the abyss below, and listening to the ridiculous words of the ridiculous man. She frowned slightly. On the smooth floor behind her, a small pile of sweet potatoes was neatly stacked. Not far away was the leftover sweet potato skin. She was still holding a cold sweet potato in her hand. The sacred and solemn divine hall of light was now filled with wine urns, food and sweet potatoes. Even though those things, including the garbage, were all neatly arranged and full of cold lines, they were still food. No matter how cold and tidy they were, they still had a unique taste of the human world. This was also the reason why she became extremely angry after hearing Ning Ke's words on the cliffs. In her eyes, there were countless stars being destroyed and countless seas being burned. The extremely strong willpower swept the whole world in the form of anger, as if it was going to burn everything. Different from the previous 2 times, tonight her anger did not change the color of heaven and earth, nor did it attract thousands of thunder. That was because she had learned how to control emotions. For cultivators or human beings, learning to control emotions was undoubtedly a very good thing. But for her it was not necessarily a good thing, because from another perspective, it meant that she had now begun to get used to the emotional things in her consciousness, which she should not have been used to. Only human beings needed such useless derivatives as emotions. She was the rule of this world. She was objective, so she was cold. She would never be happy because of external things, nor would she feel sad. When she began to constantly have feelings of hatred, anger, or other emotions, or even began to get used to these emotions, what would happen? The sweet potato in her hand had become cold, just like the world, and that kind of life she was used to. She raised the sweet potato in her hand and took a bite. She found that the feeling from her lips and tongue was very uncomfortable. She knew that it was not delicious. After all, sweet potatoes were only delicious when they were hot. She looked at the bright moon in the night sky, silent as usual. Her slender eyes slightly squinted, like willow leaves that were folded by the wind by the Yanming Lake. She was Haotian who was left in the human world. Her aura gradually became turbid. She wanted to return to the world she was familiar with, and live the life she was familiar with. However, the door of the divine kingdom had been destroyed and blocked by the bright moon. It blocked her way back, and now she could not open the passage by herself. The West Hill Divine Palace held the right to light to try to open the way for her to return to the divine kingdom of Haotian. The reason why they chose Chun Pippi was that his blood was the purest and contained the most devout faith to her for countless generations. Moreover, he was the most beloved student of the bright moon. She looked at the bright moon and imagined what she would do after returning to the divine kingdom. She felt satisfied, but suddenly remembered that there were no sweet potatoes in the divine kingdom, no matter whether they were hot or cold. She suddenly came to her senses and became more and more vigilant. She glanced at the sweet potato in her hand that was subconsciously reheated by the divine flame. She frowned in disgust and threw it out of the balcony. The divine hall of light was on the peak, and below it were 3 cliff plateaus. Below the 3 cliff plateaus was the U prison on the precipice. The sweet potato did not fall into the abyss, but fell on the third cliff plateau. Ning Ke, who was on the precipice, was lucky to escape the fate of being the first person in history to be killed by a sweet potato. The big black horse was shocked by the sweet potato that fell in front of him. It looked at the flesh of the sweet potato that was split open, looked at the heat that seeped out, and smelled the fragrance of the sweet potato. It thought of the miserable fate of working for Ning Ke every night, and not even having a midnight snack. It could not help but shed tears of gratitude, and kept thanking Haotian for her gift. I wish my friends in the earthquake area a safe journey. The title and content of this chapter are not bad. I have seen too much news in Weibo today, and my eyes are a little dazzled. I will write the second chapter after a break. I will try to update it before 3 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 864. Nothing in the world could be kept a secret forever. On the contrary, the word secret would spread faster. Just as Ning Ke had expected, Chang and had received information about the right to light even before he did. They knew that Chen Pippi was going to be burned to death. The right to light had not been held for many years. There were so many books in the library cave at the back of the mountain of the academy, but there were very few records about it. Therefore, people could not understand why the West Hill Divine Palace wanted to use Chen Pippi as a sacrifice. However, they knew the hidden danger in this matter. Haotian Taoism was using Chen Pippi's life to force the people of the academy to leave Chang'an. Of course, their biggest target was Ning Quebec. Rare materials from the counties of the Tang Empire were still being sent to the palace. The heavy black horse carriage was still parked in the palace. All the information proved that Ning Ke was still in the palace, working with eldest brother to repair the god-stunning array. How could he watch Chen Pippi die? The people at the back of the mountain of the academy knew where Ning Ke had gone. However, they did not know what decision Ning Ke would make due to the long distance. They could not keep waiting. Before Ning Ke's letter reached Chang, and someone in the back of the mountain had already made his decision, without even thinking about it. Eldest brother looked at the young and cute girl in front of the hall. He looked at the pair of old leather boots on her feet, and the blood-red broadsword in her hand, that looked more like an iron rod. After thinking for a while, he said, "Your teacher is not in Chang'an, so I can't restrict you. But I want you to understand what this decision means." Yu Lian left the academy quietly. Only Tang Shouting knew where she went. She knew that she could not wait for her teacher or brother. She said respectfully and firmly, "Eldest uncle, I understand what you mean. However, if I don't go and see, I will not feel at ease." There were many small stones in her boots and dust on her clothes. For the past 6 months, she had been cutting stone steps on the precipice of the back of the mountain of the academy. Whether her teacher was there or not, she had been squatting on the steep stone steps, sweating and fighting tirelessly with the iron rod in her hand against the hard rocks. When they were on the snow cliff in the wilderness, her strength was similar to Yi Hongyu's. Now Yi Hongyu was a grand cultivator, at the peak of the knowing destiny state, while she seemed to be stuck at that level. It was not because she lacked talent, but because the cultivation of the devil's doctrine and that of Haotian Taoism were very different. Yu Lian made her jump into the waterfall continuously and suffer continuously. This was the homework that the teacher assigned to the student, and it was also the training that the leader of the devil's doctrine gave to the junior. After years of diligent learning and cruel training, the spirit of this girl from the devil's doctrine had been tempered to an unimaginable level. However, there was still no qualitative change in her state, because she still needed an opportunity to release her accumulation. Tang Shouting thought that this was the opportunity for her to improve her realm. She wanted to go to Peach Mountain, she wanted to see Chen Pippi, and she would have to face countless dangerous battles. For the cultivators of the devil's doctrine, battles were the only way to improve their strength. Only real fierce battles could cultivate the truly powerful. She was going to be the most powerful woman in the world, so she was never afraid of battle. But when she said goodbye to the academy, she did not think that even if she became as powerful as Yi Hongyu, she would not be able to break into the Peach Mountain to save Chen Pippi. Even if she could find the true meaning of being a powerhouse in battle, she would not be greeted by the shocked eyes of the cultivation world, but a cold death. None of that mattered. As she said before, what she sought was peace of mind in battle. If she did not dare to fight, how could she have peace of mind? Eldest brother looked at her, as if he was looking at the third sister, who came to the academy with their teacher many years ago. She loved wearing green dresses, and had a pair of frighteningly mature eyes. If you encounter anything, listen to your youngest uncle, he ordered. If youngest uncle makes sense, I will listen to him, Tang Xiaoding said. She put away the iron rod, dusted herself, and kicked off the gravel on her boots. Then she left Chang, and went to the West Hill Divine Kingdom, and that stupid fat man. There was wind on the sea, and then waves. The blue sea water kept stirring, looking very uneasy. So there were many uneasy clouds in the blue sky that reflected the color of the sea water. A black wooden ship broke through the waves from the depths of the sea. None of the fishermen on the shore, or the laborers on the docks could see clearly where the black ship had been. They couldn't help but have an abnormally strong feeling, as if the black ship had suddenly leapt out of the sea from the netherworld. The black ship slowly approached the shore, and the women selling water and food kept shouting. The strange feeling was not as important as survival. But there was no response from the ship. After a while, more than 10 people walked down from the black ship, carrying water and food in their hands, and began to distribute them to the poor on the shore. There were men and women, old and young. The common characteristic was that their skin was very dark, and they wore the common wide-brimmed bamboo hats. They were no different from the fishermen on the South Sea. But what was particularly eye-catching, or rather glaring, was that they were all wearing red divine robes. The people on the shore were not wrong. The style of the divine robes was a little old, and the cloth looked a little old. But the insignia that no one dared to forge was absolutely real. Compared to the ordinary divine robes of the West Hill Divine Palace, the only difference was probably the black ribbon around their waists. The difference between the divine priests and deacons in the West Hill Divine Palace was very strict. The red-robed divine priest was a very important figure, especially in the secular world. Usually, a small country would have a red-robed divine priest, and the Great River Kingdom, that the town belonged to, only had 3 red-robed divine priests. And the dozen or so men and women who looked like fishermen were all wearing real red divine robes. Could it be that they were all red-robed divine officials? How could there be so many bigwigs in the remote South Sea? The people in the town found it hard to believe. What was even more unbelievable was that these red-robed divine priests actually condescended to personally distribute food to the poor. When had the divine priests in the divine hall ever done such a thing? The news that more than a dozen red-robed divine priests appeared in the South Sea town quickly spread throughout the Great River Kingdom. When the king of the Great River Kingdom and the representative of the Black Ink Garden rushed to the seaside day and night, they found that the red-robed divine priests had already left, and no one knew where they went. These red-robed divine priests, who looked like fishermen, began to silently walk north after landing on the shore. They purposely chose remote paths to walk, and sometimes directly crossed the mountains and forests, as if they were worried about disturbing the ordinary people. They stayed overnight by the stream, and ate the small salted fish they brought with them. Even if they wanted to ask the people for rice, they would pay. Even if they met the most devout Haotian believers on the road, they would not accept the gold and silver offered by the other party. Although they wore divine robes, they were not similar to the arrogant divine priests in the West Hill Divine Palace. Instead, they were more like the ascetic monks in the Yueluan Kingdom, walking silently with pride. One day, these people came to the Xiaoming Lake not far from the Black Ink Garden to take a rest. A young girl raised her head, looked at the beautiful Mogan Mountain and said, "Is this the legendary Black Ink Garden?" Probably because they fished in the South Sea all year round, and were exposed to the wind and sun. These people in red divine robes all had very dark skin, and a little rough. This young girl was very young, and her skin was relatively light and smoother. Her eyebrows were thick and straight like knives, revealing a healthy and strong aura. A tall and thin middle-aged man said, "Yes." The young girl looked at the looming pavilion in the Mogan Mountain and said, "When I was a child, I heard from my uncle that there was a famous divine talisman master here. A few days ago, I heard that his female disciple had also become a divine talisman master. It seems to be a good sect. Should we destroy the Black Ink Garden along the way?" The divine talisman master was an extremely powerful existence in the cultivation world. Even in the West Hill Divine Palace, he had a very high status. It was not easy to defeat a divine talisman master. Not to mention that the Black Ink Garden had the master of calligrapher, and now Mo Shanshan. The young girl looked only 17 or 18 years old, but she actually said that she would destroy the Black Ink Garden along the way. Even if she had started cultivating in her mother's womb, and could sense the initial awareness state before she was born, there was no reason for her to make such a bold statement. What was more incredible was that when she said that she would destroy the Black Ink Garden along the way, her expression was so normal and natural, as if she was just talking about who should sleep in which tent tonight. If other cultivators heard the words of the young girl, they might be shocked speechless, but it was more likely that they would laugh at her shamelessly. However, the people by the lake did not show any strange expression, as if it was a matter of course for them to destroy the Black Ink Garden. Some of them even looked at the young girl with a doting expression, as if they would immediately go to the Black Ink Garden, as long as she was willing. The tall and thin middle-aged man looked at the young girl and shook his head. He said, "Little you, don't mess around. Now we have something important to do. Let's go back to Peach Mountain first." Hearing the words "go back to Peach Mountain," the young man's dark face became happy and proud. Even the most taciturn old man smiled. The Rite to Light was the grandest sacrificial ceremony in the West Hill Divine Palace, and the grandest festival in the world of Hautian. The last Rite to Light was so far away that it had left people's memory. Today's Rite to Light undoubtedly attracted the attention of all believers, and also welcomed the most distinguished guests in the world. Offerings from various countries were continuously sent to the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Although those rare treasures were not qualified to be the main offerings of the Rite to Light, they were enough to satisfy the Divine Hall. Some of the most devout believers of Hautian came to the West Hill Divine Kingdom after hearing the news of the Rite to Light. They had been worshipping the mountain since spring. Other than these people, the House of Red Sleeves and other dance troupes from Chang, and were the first batch of people to participate in the Rite to Light. They were arranged by the Divine Hall to practice dancing and etiquette every day. Most importantly, their singing and dancing performances had to go through a lot of tests. A letter from Chang and was sent to the garden, and then to the sweet potato shop in the small town. Then it was brought back to the book hall of the Revelation Institute by Ning, Quebec. After reading the letter personally written by eldest brother, he did not do anything else. He did not go to the precipice to see Chin Pippi. Just like everyone else in the world, he quietly waited for the Rite to Light. Chapter 865. In order to participate in the Rite to Light, countless believers of Hautian poured into the West Hill Divine Kingdom from all over the world. Envoys from various countries arrived one after another. They were arranged by the Divine Hall to stay in the gardens and halls around the Peach Mountain. Those with high status were arranged to stay in the Revelation Institute. Lu Yiqing represented the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom. Ning Ke stood on the cliff and looked at the blind swordsman, who was brought into the Revelation Institute by Priest Moli. He recalled the battle outside the Academy's side gate years ago, and could not help but feel a little emotional. Lu Yiqing had been a nobody in the first half of his cultivation career. He only became famous after he was summoned back to the Sword Garret. Many people thought highly of his talent in swordsmanship. Second brother even said that if he did not miss the opportunity, he could possibly reach the level of his brother, the Sage of Sword Lu Bai. Lu Bai also thought highly of him, and asked him to challenge the academy's disciples who had entered the human realm in Chang, and to sharpen his mind. He did not hesitate to lose to gain something. However, the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace did something, and the challenge became a battle of life and death. Ning Ke, who broke out of seclusion, blinded him. An ordinary cultivator would not be able to recover from such a heavy setback. However, Lu Yiqing lived up to Lu Bai's expectations and second brother's comments. After he was blinded, he cultivated in the sword garret for several years. His cultivation state and mind improved by leaps and bounds, and he entered the knowing destiny state like a sword cutting through bamboo. From this point of view, his eyes being blinded by Ning Ke might be the so-called opportunity that second brother had once mentioned. During the battle in the Verdant Canyon, Lu Bai had chopped off the second brother's right arm and suffered serious injuries. He had returned to the sword garret to recuperate. Now, Lu Yiqing was in charge of the affairs of the sword garret. It was rumored that the sword garret had killed the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom in a fit of rage. Ning Ke had met Qing Jiqing, a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state of the sword garret in the Lank Temple. However, he was not in the sword garret today. It seemed that Lu Yiqing's position in the sword garret had been stabilized. He was still puzzled because the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, did not come. Although it was rumored that he had not recovered, the right to light was a big event. As a visiting professor of the Divine Hall, Lu Bai should be there in person. Then, Ning Ke saw the delegation from the Golden Tribe Royal Court. The delegation of the Golden Tribe Royal Court only had one carriage. In the carriage sat an old man with wrinkles all over his face. The carriage was not pulled by a horse, but by a strong grassland man with muscles as hard as stone. He looked extremely shabby. However, after knowing the identity of the two, no one felt that the scale was shabby anymore, because the old man in the cotton shirt in the carriage was the most respected national master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, Master Baoding, and the strong grassland man pulling the carriage was General Lebu, the #1 martial arts master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Even if there were only two of them, it was enough to show the Golden Tribe Royal Court's respect for the divine halls of West Hill, and the importance they attached to the right to light. What shocked the divine halls the most was that the national master of the Golden Tribe and Lebu came to West Hill directly through Tang instead of going around Yueluan. Ning Ke had met the nation master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court in the wilderness, and knew how unfathomable this seemingly ordinary old man's state was. He did not even dare to look at this old man. The Yin Kingdom's diplomatic corps had also arrived. Emperor Chongming, who had just ascended the throne at the beginning of the year, had abandoned the heavy state affairs, and arrived with hundreds of attendants. Then the representatives of the Buddhism sect arrived as well. Monk Guanhai, the abbot of the Lank Temple, came alone. Monk Wu Dao was nowhere to be found. Many Iron Staff ascetic monks from the White Tower Temple also came. What made Ning Ke most wary was that the Xiankong Temple in the distant West Wilderness had also sent a representative. It was Qin Yen, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect. The noblest royal family and the most powerful cultivators had all arrived at the West Hill Divine Kingdom to participate in the right to light. The scale of the event and the grandeur of the rules far exceeded the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival at the Lank Temple. Only the Tang Empire did not send an official delegation. The House of Red Sleeves did not send anyone, and neither did the Academy. The war had just ended. Many people could understand why the Tang Empire and the Academy did not send anyone to the right to light. However, they could not understand why they did not hear anything from the Jishou Abbey, even though the Xiankong Temple, the unknown place of the Buddhism sect, had sent a representative. One must know that the mysterious Taoist temple was the Taoist sect's unknown place. Many people came to the West Hill Divine Palace. Some waited in the West Hill Divine Palace, while others chose to leave because there was nothing they wanted there. That person was Prince Longqing. Longqing left the Peach Mountain and headed for the Jishou Abbey. As the mysterious unknown place, not many people knew where the Taoist temple was in the deep mountains, even in the West Hill Divine Palace. However, he had once lived in the Taoist temple for a long time, so he naturally knew the way back. The Jisho Abbey was in the West Hill Divine Kingdom. It was not far from the Peach Mountain, where the Divine Hall was located. There were several steep peaks in between. When the weather was good, one could even see the Divine Hall in the sunlight from the abbey. Long Qing turned his gaze from the Divine Hall and looked at the ordinary and even shabby Taoist door in front of him. Just like the last time he came, the wooden door of the Taoist temple was still tightly shut, and no sound could be heard from inside. The Jisho Abbey was the unknown place of Taoist sect, so it was naturally not as ordinary and shabby as it looked. There was an extremely powerful Taoist divine array in the abbey. When the array was activated, one could not climb over the walls or through the windows. One could only enter through the door of the abbey. When the door was closed, no one could enter or leave. The Taoist temple would then become a prison, with the sky as the cover and the ground as the paving. No one could escape. After the Jisho Abbey appeared in the human world, no one other than the headmaster of the academy could easily break into it. Last autumn, when the eldest brother of the academy and the abbey dean fought with the distanceless state, they had come here and left instantly. They were not imprisoned by the big array in the Jisho Abbey. However, that did not mean that the eldest brother's state was enough to ignore the big array. It was because someone who understood the array very well had tampered with it in advance. That person was Chun Pippi, who had lived in the Jisho Abbey since he was a child. Long Qing knew about this, so he took the risk to enter the U prison to see Chun Pippi. He wanted to know how to enter the Jisho Abbey. Chun Pippi told him that the way to enter the Jisho Abbey was 7 in and 13 out. Long Qing did not know what these 5 words meant. After thinking about it for the past few days, he guessed that the 7 in referred to the 7 huts by the lake, where the tomes of arcane were placed. They represented the 7 passages of the array, and the so-called 13 out referred to the 13 gates of the array of life and death. He did not know much about the array, but he had courage and determination. Looking at the stone steps in front of the abbey, he took a deep breath and walked up. He stretched out his hand and pushed the door. Before his palm could land on the door, an incomparably majestic aura instantly occupied his body and mind. Numerous streaks of black blood flowed from his nostrils and eyes. He had actually suffered extremely heavy injuries without a sound. If he had not been a heartless person, he would have been dead by now. Long Qing retreated to the bottom of the stone steps and looked at the ordinary wooden door. His face became abnormally pale. He did not expect to enter the Jisho Abbey in one go, but he did not expect the array to be so terrifying. After a moment of silence, he left the abbey and went around to the back of the Taoist abbey. He looked at the gray stone walls that were not high, but he did not have the courage to climb them. Then he saw the Green Mountain behind the abbey. Long Qing was very familiar with the Green Mountain. He had traveled back and forth between the Taoist temple and the Green Mountain countless times. He had walked through the caves in the cliff that looked like ant nests. He knew that the reason why the mountain looked green was because the surface of the cliff was covered with dense green vines. He knew that there were many terrible people living in it. The Green Mountain had collapsed and turned into a mound that was more than 100 feet high. It was covered with green grass and looked like an old grave that had not been taken care of for many years. Long Qing looked at the Green Mountain and noticed that the top was very flat. It gave people the feeling that a giant had stretched out a foot from the sky and directly stepped on the original Green Mountain into its current state. The ant nest-like caves in the Green Mountain had long disappeared. The peerless powerhouses of Haotian Taoism, who had once lived in those caves, had all turned into ashes in the big tomb. Recalling the torture he had suffered in those caves, the power he had felt, the half-man Taoist was so powerful that it was hard to describe. Long Qing could not believe what he had seen and was shocked speechless. No matter how much he hated those old Taoists, they still represented the power of Haotian Taoism. That experience had always been the source of his pride and confidence. However, in front of this miraculous scene, how laughable was his pride and confidence. Long Qing returned to the Jisho Abbey and sat cross-legged. It took him a long time to get over the shock in his heart and calm his somewhat dispirited heart. He began to continue thinking about Chun Pippi's words. 7 in and 13 out. What did it mean? He thought hard for a night, and only opened his eyes again when the morning light came. The moss-covered stone steps came into view again. He suddenly noticed that there were a total of 6 steps in front of the abbey. 13 minus 7 was 6. Long Qing stood up after a moment of silence, and walked to the stone steps. He turned around and walked backwards up 6 steps, down 6 steps, and then back up 7 steps. There were only 6 steps in front of the abbey. After 7 steps, his back should have hit the wooden door. However, he did not hit anything because he had already entered the Jisho Abbey. Advancing was advancing. Knowing the masculinity and defending the femininity was the Jisho Abbey. Knowing when to advance, defending when to retreat. Only by retreating could one enter the Jisho Abbey. 7 in and 13 out. Perhaps this was what it meant. Long Qing walked into the Jisho Abbey and walked along the familiar lake. He came to the familiar house. Before he knocked on the door opened. A middle-aged Taoist looked at Long Qing and said, "You came faster than I thought." Long Qing bowed to the middle-aged Taoist and said, "Greetings, uncle." The middle-aged Taoist waved his hand and said, "Go in." Long Qing obeyed and walked into the room. He smelled a faint stench, which came from the person on the bed. He had smelled it before in the black wind in the south of Chang'an City. Looking at the person on the bed, he felt a little complicated. However, his expression did not change. He walked to the bed and knelt down with his forehead on the ground. He said, "I am useless. Please punish me, master. I will try to finish the next chapter before 2 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 866. The person on the couch was the Abbey Dean. He used to be invincible, but now he was plagued by evil. He looked like an ordinary old man who was about to die, but his eyes were still so calm, as if he could see through everything. Long Qing knelt in front of the couch, and did not dare to look up. He felt that all his thoughts could not be hidden. "I am not as good as the headmaster, and you are not as good as Ning Quebec. This is natural." The Abbey Dean looked at him, and said in a weak voice. There were many pauses in just a few words. Long Qing looked up, and did not dare to look into his eyes. Nor did he dare to look at the deep or shallow knife marks on his face. His eyes fell on the layout of the quiet room. It was a very simple quiet room, similar to the prison cells in the U prison in Peach Mountain. What surprised him was that he did not feel any inhibition in the Jisho Abbey. The Abbey Dean looked at the expression on his face, and knew what he was thinking. He smiled and said, "In Chang'an, I understood the word tranquility, and rejected the will of Haotian at that moment. That was extremely disrespectful, so Haotian didn't let me die. Instead, he let me experience this pain with my life. You're right. There is no inhibition in the Abbey, only the will of Haotian. I'm like a prisoner now. If I can't reflect on my mistakes, I may leave. But I don't know what will happen to me after I leave." The big tactical array in the Jisho Abbey could stop outsiders from entering and leaving, but it could not stop Chen Mao from entering and leaving. Haotian did not place any restrictions on him. His restrictions came from his respect for Haotian, and his regret for the mistakes he had made. This lack of restrictions was the greatest torture. Enduring the stench of the bed, Long Qing said humbly, "I will accompany you to take care of you. After you recover, you can at least go to the lakeside." The Abbey Dean said, "I thought that your eyes would immediately turn gray when you entered the room. I did not expect you to be much more patient than before." There was only one skill in the world that could turn a cultivator's eyes gray. It was the gray eyes Taoism skill recorded in the Sha hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane, and originated from the practice of Taotai of the Devil's Doctrine. Long Qing knelt down again and said in a trembling voice, "How dare I have such a rebellious idea?" The Abbey Dean looked at him, and said with a smile, "Half-man Taoist was half a master to you. Didn't you suck him dry? The word treason is the most suitable word to describe you." Long Qing clearly knew that the Abbey Dean was now a cripple, and that he could kill him with just a finger. However, he still did not dare to raise his head in fear. It was not because Chun Pippi had told him in the U prison that the Abbey Dean no longer had any psyche power, and that it was useless to use the gray eyes. It was because he was really afraid. Back then, on the shores of the South Sea, he had already decided to be an ordinary merchant and live the life of an ordinary person. However, when he saw that wooden boat on the surface of the sea, he finally understood his unwillingness. A black peach blossom grew on the side of the wooden boat, gently trembling in the slightly fishy sea breeze. He had learned from the Abbey Dean and was sent back to the Jisho Abbey. He had a series of adventures and finally recovered his power. A black peach blossom also grew on his chest, covering the hole that Ning Ke had pierced through. For him, meeting the Abbey Dean on the shores of the South Sea was the greatest lucky chance of his life. However, it was also from that day onwards that the black peach blossom on his chest could only tremble in the wind of the South Sea. He had indeed thought of using the gray eyes to directly devour the Abbey Dean's cultivation state. Even though Chun Pippi had seen through his plan, he still wanted to try it after entering the Jisho Abbey. However, when he knelt in front of the couch, he realized that those thoughts were delusional. He had the courage to suck the half-man Taoist dry, but he did not have the courage to look at the Abbey Dean. "You disappoint me." The Abbey Dean looked at him and sighed. Long Qing lowered his head even more and did not dare to reply. "Do you know why I took you as my disciple back then? It was not because of your talent. Although you were known for your talent in cultivation in the secular world, you should know very well that there are many people who are more talented than you in the Abbey, the school, and the second floor. It was also not because of your will and determination. You gave up after being shot by Ning Ke and became a cripple. Have you ever thought about what Ning Ke's state of mind was like when he could not cultivate?" The Abbey Dean looked at his pale cheeks and said with pity, "I chose you because I thought I saw the destruction and madness in your bones. I thought you would do anything to achieve your goal, no matter cruel or rebellious. You don't have a heart, so you don't have love. You don't have love, so you are fearless and disrespectful. That's why you can ignore all rules and see the threshold of the lawless realm. When you use the gray eyes to absorb the half-man Taoist, killing everywhere and committing all kinds of evil in the wilderness, I was actually very gratified. Because at that time, you still seemed to have countless possibilities. But today, you don't dare to look up at me. I am disappointed in you not because you once thought of deceiving your master and killing me, but because you still have fear even though you do not have a heart. You have such a good opportunity, but you do not grasp it." After hearing these words, Long Qing was soaked in cold sweat. He said in a hoarse voice, "That is because I still want to learn from you. I thought I could become strong enough this way." The Abbey Dean said expressionlessly, "I am already a cripple. What else can you learn from me?" Long Qing raised his head with difficulty and said, "You still have wisdom as vast as the ocean." The Abbey Dean thought of the thousands of knives in Chang, and then said indifferently, "Wisdom is not as mysterious as people think. It is just the way of doing things. Compared to absolute power, sometimes it seems very weak." Long Qing said, "I still have power now and I will have more and more power. That is why I want to obtain your wisdom and learn how to use these powers." The Abbey Dean looked at him quietly and said, "After you learn these powers, what will you do?" Long Qing looked at the knife marks on the Abbey Dean's face and said, "I want to challenge Ning Quebec," the Abbey Dean said. "Just for such a boring reason? He was crippled by Ning Ke and Chang'an. Logically speaking, he should hate Ning Quebec." However, when he heard what Long Qing said, he was indifferent and even thought it was boring. Long Qing could not understand what the Abbey Dean was thinking. After thinking for a while, he said, "This is what I want to do the most. Maybe it is a little sad, but I seem to be living because of that person." "It is indeed sad," the Abbey Dean said. Long Qing said, "Life always needs a reason." The Abbey Dean said, "When human beings try their best to find reasons for their actions, Hao Yin will laugh. Since she thinks I am disrespectful, why would she let you learn from me?" After a moment of silence, Long Qing said, She knows my loyalty and cowardice. And maybe, she needs this reason from me. So even if she laughs, she will not stop me. The Abbey Dean said. If she no longer needs a reason to kill Ning Ke, what will you do? Long Qing's face turned paler, and he did not know how to answer. The Abbey Dean looked at him quietly and suddenly said, Let me tell you what to do. The reason you find for your actions can only be your own reason. You have already betrayed Haotian once, why not do it again? You can only be loyal to yourself. And the source of your cowardice can only be your own selfishness. As the saying goes, treason and heresy. If you dare not even go against heaven, how can you be called treason? If you can't even let go of Taoism, how can you not be called Taoism? Long Qing's eyes were filled with fear. He subconsciously looked out of the window, as if he felt someone was eavesdropping. After being shot into a wasteland by Ning Ke, he had bitterly decided to give up his faith. When he swallowed the half-man Taoist with his gray eyes and jumped off the cliff, he had also decided to stand on the side of darkness and no longer follow the footsteps of light. However, in the end, he found that the darkness he chose was still the darkness of Haotian. At that moment, he felt unprecedentedly relaxed, and his respect for Haotian became even more unshakable. Don't worry that she can hear us. The Abbey Dean said, Haotian is omniscient and omnipotent. That is because she stands high enough above the human world. After coming to the human world, she is just a little higher than us. Long Qing seemed to understand, but he still could not hide his fear. The Abbey Dean slowly reached out his left hand in front of Long Qing and said, Go back to your room. Hearing this, Long Qing was sure that the Abbey Dean was willing to let him cultivate in the Jishou Abbey. He was overjoyed and quickly took out the Sha hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane that he had stolen. The Abbey Dean did not take the Tomes of Arcane and said, The 7 Tomes of Arcane are the weapons that Haotian gave to Taoism. The so-called weapons are knowledge and wisdom. Since you want to learn my wisdom, this Tomes of Arcane is in your hands. You can also read the other 5 Tomes of Arcane. I want something else. Long Qing vaguely understood what the Abbey Dean wanted, but he did not understand why. He took out the black peach blossom and respectfully placed it in the Abbey Dean's hand. The Abbey Dean gently turned the stem of the black peach blossom and asked, What is this? Long Qing did not understand, but he honestly answered, This is the peach blossom of your disciple. The Abbey Dean said, If you die, what will happen to this peach blossom of life? Any cultivator would definitely understand the meaning of a natal item. This was the knowledge that must be mastered at the beginning of cultivation. So Long Qing still did not understand why the Abbey Dean would ask such a simple question. He said, After I die, this peach blossom of life will wither and never come back to life again. The Abbey Dean looked at the black peach blossom between his fingers and asked, What if it is another natal item? Long Qing said, If it is a natal sword, it can be refined again. But that is equivalent to dying once. The Abbey Dean signaled him to leave the quiet room. Then the room became quiet again. Wind came in from the window, but it could not blow away the stench from the bed. He struggled to get up and inserted Long Qing's peach blossom of life into the sand table in front of the window. He looked at the black peach blossom trembling in the wind and thought of the peach blossoms all over the peach mountain. He smiled. Haotian came to the human world. The Jishou Abbey became an abandoned prison, and the most powerful cultivator in the human world became a useless man. But the real story had just begun. It's Monday. I need to write a special chapter to solicit votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 867. There is still one day to go before the character contest. Sang 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 is ranked first for the heroine and Shan Shan is ranked first for the supporting actress. The voting is based on fan value and does not affect the fan value. Therefore, the fluctuation is very big. Since I am already in first place, I still want to fight for it. Please vote on the page of Yi Jianya's book or the main page of Chidian. This is the first chapter. I know it is easy to feel sleepy when writing dialogues without any big contradictions, but it is really hard to write. I will try to finish the next chapter before 2 o'clock. The middle-aged Taoist walked into the quiet room and saw the Abbey Dean standing by the window smiling at the black peach blossoms. He was very surprised and hurried to help him back to the couch. He looked at the Abbey Dean seriously and said, "Senior brother, are you really going to give up your faith?" The Abbey Dean smiled and said, "I grew up in a Taoist temple, and the first book I read was Taoist scripture. My faith in Haotian has long been integrated into my blood and become my breath. The meaning of my life is to carry out Haotian's will. Giving it up is equivalent to betraying myself. Naturally, I will not." The middle-aged Taoist asked confusedly, "If so, why did you let Longqing stay in the Jisho Abbey? Why did you send the letter to the South Sea? Why did you treat the one in the Divine Hall of Light?" Before he finished, the Abbey Dean said, "I believe in Haotian, not the one in the Divine Hall of Light." The middle-aged Taoist was even more confused. He thought that the one in the Divine Hall of Light was definitely Haotian. The Abbey Dean looked at him and said, "If she is Haotian, then who is fighting against the headmaster in the Divine Kingdom? Even if she used to be Haotian, is the Haotian that came to the human world still the Haotian that we believe in? Is the Haotian that has been desecrated by mortals still the Haotian that we believe in?" The middle-aged Taoist said in a trembling voice, "Faith does not allow any doubt." The Abbey Dean said, "What is piety? Piety is loyalty to faith. What is loyalty to faith? It is not only loyalty to the object that we believe in. Faith comes from you and me and falls on the other side. There is Haotian, you and me. No one can be missing. Then only the Haotian that we believe in is the real Haotian." The words were very mysterious. The middle-aged Taoist seemed to understand, and his clothes were soaked with cold sweat. He said, "But Haotian will not think so. I told Longqing before that since she has come to the human world, she is no longer omniscient and omnipotent. Now that I think about it, the headmaster of the academy is indeed a great person." The Abbey Dean looked at the sky outside the window and said with emotion. The middle-aged Taoist said, "However, no matter how great a person is, he cannot defeat Haotian. Is death really that scary?" Is the goal of human cultivation to have self-awareness and eternity? The drunkard and the butcher think that they are immortal because they have their own divine kingdom. In my opinion, it is not true. The Abbey Dean said, "Haotian is not a life, so it has the property of eternity. Every beginning should have an end, and every life should return to the non-life eternity. If life wants to be eternal, then it can only become a completely different form of existence. And how is that different from death?" The middle-aged Taoist asked, "Then why do we cultivate Tao?" The Abbey Dean thought of the thousands of knives in Chong, and the things that were filled with the taste of the human world. He thought of himself landing by the lake in the south of the city, and the fish struggling in the puddle beside his face. He said, "Cultivation is for enlightenment and liberation. Only in this way can one obtain peace and joy at the end of life." The middle-aged Taoist frowned slightly and asked confusedly, "Should all the cultivation sects in the world take this path?" The Abbey Dean said, "People in the academy live recklessly and casually, and they will eventually go against heaven's will. They can face death calmly, because they believe that they did not let down their lives. But only the truly powerful can live like them. The ordinary people in the world are like pigs and dogs. How can they face the end as narcissistically as they do?" Neither the headmaster of the academy, nor Koharan, have ever considered these problems. However, Haotian Taoism has always been considering these problems, because we know that we are all pigs and dogs under Haotian. Therefore, we must find a way for ordinary people to face the end peacefully. The middle-aged Taoist understood and said, "That is the belief in Haotian, and the hope for the divine kingdom." That's right. It is never Haotian who wants us to believe in her, but we need to believe in her. I also need to believe in her, but I only believe in her in the divine kingdom, not the one over there. The Abbey Dean looked at the direction of the divine halls of West Hill in silence. The middle-aged Taoist asked after a moment of silence, "What should we do with Longqing?" The Abbey Dean withdrew his gaze and looked at the black peach blossom on the sand table in front of the window. He said, "I am really disappointed in him. He has experienced so many setbacks and tragedies, but he still could not have the courage or desire to challenge the rules. Even if he reads all 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane, no matter how diligent he is and how blessed he will at most become the second drunkard, or the butcher after hundreds of years. What is the point of that?" The drunkard and the butcher were the only grand cultivators in the world who had experienced the everlasting night. They were the most senior in the cultivation world and had the most unfathomable states. They only showed up in Chang and enforced the academy in the Tang Empire to sign a humiliating peace treaty with the divine halls of West Hill. But according to the Abbey Dean's words, even if Long Qing had become such 2 people, he still would not be satisfied. That was really unexpected. The middle-aged Taoist was silent. He knew very well that the drunkard and the butcher were not in his senior brother's eyes. Before the Abbey Dean came to Chang, he already had the peerless states of Taoism, Buddhism, and the Devil's Doctrine. After understanding the state of pureness, he even felt that the drunkard and the butcher's states of mind were so rotten that they could not even be mentioned. He only had eyes for the headmaster. His life's pursuit or goal was to touch the headmaster's state of no rules. It was not the limitless state, but the limitless state. Because of his faith, the Abbey Dean could never understand the word limitless state. That was why he took Long Qing as his disciple, because Long Qing had the hope of breaking through and building up again. Because Long Qing had once betrayed his faith, he hoped that Long Qing could have the chance to walk on that path. Unfortunately, he did not succeed. This is a very cliché story, but it is the same for any story. The Abbey Dean said, Haotian had foreseen the stories that are happening in the human world many years ago. That is why she gave the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane to the human world. I am not talking about the prophecy on the Ming hand scroll, but the names of the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. The middle-aged Taoist had been in charge of the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane in the Jishou Abbey. Naturally, he knew the names of the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. He said in a trembling voice, "The sun sets and the sand shines, and the sky opens up?" The Abbey Dean looked at the sky outside the window and said expressionlessly, "Yes, she wants to open up the sky again." The middle-aged Taoist looked as if he had suffered a heavy blow. He said with a pale face, "Then what should the human world do?" The Abbey Dean ignored his shock and uneasiness. He slowly closed his eyes and continued, "She wants to return to the kingdom of Haotian, so the divine hall holds the right to light. She wants to use the pure blood of the Chen family for tens of thousands of years as a sacrifice to open up the path to heaven. However, she will definitely fail, because the academy will go to the Peach Mountain. Even if the people of the academy have already reached the Peach Mountain, the academy will also fail, because she knows everything. She has been waiting for the people of the academy on the Peach Mountain, but she will also fail, because she thinks she can do it, but in fact she can't. So in the end, everyone will fail, and no one will win." This passage seemed to be telling a story that had already happened, but in fact, the story had not happened yet. Therefore, it was filled with an indescribable feeling of prophecy. The middle-aged Taoist said in shock, "There is something that Haotian can't do?" The Abbey Dean opened his eyes and looked at his younger brother beside the bed. He said, "Even if the sun sets and the sand opens up tomorrow, she still needs to cut off her connection with the human world in order to return to the divine kingdom. However, she doesn't understand that the aura of the human world left in her by the headmaster of the academy and her connection with the human world are not so easy to cut off." The middle-aged Taoist was sweating profusely, thinking that what his senior brother said today was extremely disrespectful to Haotian. He said in fear, "Haotian knows everything in the world, and she naturally knows what you want to do, senior brother." The Abbey Dean said indifferently, "Now, even I don't know what I will do. Even if she knows everything, how can she know something that doesn't exist?" Ning Ke closed his eyes on the precipice But the precipice still thought that he was looking at him, because this was the intention. Even if he used the method of the Buddhism sect, he could only calm his mind, but he could not make it disappear. In fact, no one could make his mind disappear and escape from the calculation of heaven's will. But the Abbey Dean said so, and he could really do it, because even though he was now a useless person, he was still a useless person in the state of pureness. In the history of mankind, there had never been such a powerful useless person like him. The middle-aged Taoist asked, "Senior brother, what should we do?" The Abbey Dean said, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, the divine kingdom to the divine kingdom, and the human world to the human world." The middle-aged Taoist said in a trembling voice, "This is a gamble." The Abbey Dean looked at him and said, "Do you know why the Jisho Abbey requires 7 entries and 13 exits to enter?" The middle-aged Taoist shook his head. The Abbey Dean said, "That's because before the everlasting night, the first Abbey Dean of the Jisho Abbey was a gambler before he started cultivating. He was always troubled by the interest of 7 entries and 13 exits." It was the first time that the middle-aged Taoist heard about the background of the founding master of Haotian Taoism, and he was stunned and speechless. He founded Haotian Taoism after he achieved great success in cultivation. He could have been free, but he still pitied the people. So he chose Haotian on behalf of mankind and became our faith. From that moment on, the human world we live in became the world of Haotian. We were protected by Haotian and survived for tens of thousands of years. The Abbey Dean said, "This is the most impudent gamble in the human world. Haotian Taoism has gambled on behalf of mankind for countless generations. Why shouldn't I continue?" The middle-aged Taoist was silent for a long time and said, "That's why Haotian Taoism needs to be wary of her." The Abbey Dean said, "That's right. If she can't cut off her relationship with the mortal world, we have to do it for her. If even Haotian Taoism can't do it, then we have to find a way to cut her off as well." The middle-aged Taoist said, "What about Pippi?" The Abbey Dean said, "He is also a disciple of Haotian Taoism. If he can really help her return to the divine kingdom and restore Haotian, then his death will be meaningful. If the right to light turns out to be a joke, he won't die. If he doesn't die, then he will have a great lucky chance. My blood flows in him, and he is a student of the headmaster of the academy. Whether he lives or dies, he will not be mediocre. If you like this work, please come to Chitian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 868. Because of the right to light, powerhouses like the National Master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and Qi Nian of the Xiankang Temple had come to the divine halls of West Hill. Ning Ke would not be able to resist any one of them. That was why he had kept a low profile and spent most of his time in the Revelation Institute. He did not even go to the precipice. According to his style of doing things, he should not have put himself in such a dangerous situation. In fact, according to his original plan, he would only stay for a month at most after sneaking into the West Hill Divine Palace. He would start his attack before the right to light officially started. However, he did not expect the situation to change so suddenly. Chen Pippi was imprisoned in the U prison by the West Hill Divine Palace, so he could only wait. Before he left Qinghe Prefecture, he had told Wang Jinglu that he would be back in a month at most. Now that it was autumn, he could not leave. He had to send another message to Qinghe Prefecture to ask Wang Jinglu to wait a little longer. As for Wang Jinglu's arrangements, he had no choice but to ignore it for the time being. It was already night. He returned to the Revelation Institute and took out his arrow box and iron cutlass. He walked along the path behind the Revelation Institute to the front yard of Peach Mountain. The front yard of Peach Mountain and several divine halls on the peak formed a straight line. The front yard was extremely wide and could accommodate tens of thousands of believers at the same time. It was the place where the right to light would be held. The deacons of the divine halls were tidying up the place. Not far away, several high-level array tactical masters were reinforcing the front yard. They must have arranged some dazzling miracles for the right to light. Ning Ke was wearing the uniform of a servant of the Revelation Institute. He looked like a servant in black, and did not attract any attention. Although the front yard of Peach Mountain was heavily guarded, his speed and reflexes had long surpassed that of ordinary people. He sneaked into the forest on the left, and buried the arrow box and iron cutlass in the soil on the side of the yard. He brushed off the dirt on his clothes, and looked at the countless torches in the night. He looked at the nervous deacons of the divine halls, and imagined the grand scene of the right to light in a few days. Even he began to feel nervous. Then he looked at the 4 divine halls on the peak and frowned slightly. Tonight, he did not look at the divine hall of light. Instead, he looked at the black divine hall of judgment on the edge of the cliff. The divine hall of judgment was a little far from the other 3 divine halls. It was cold and lonely. His last resort was the seat of heavenly black jade in the divine hall of judgment. However, it was too risky for the woman on the seat of heavenly black jade. Therefore, he could not make up his mind. As time went by, Chen Pippi was about to be burned to death. He heard that Yi Hung Yu had been meditating in the hall ever since she returned to Peach Mountain from Chang'an. He had not seen her since he came to the West Hill Divine Palace. Since he could not meet her by chance, he had to go and have a look. It was already autumn in Qinghe Prefecture. Wang Jinglu received the secret letter from Chang, and then was silent for a long time. Then, he put on the bamboo hat again, and left his residence in the carriage. He came to an ordinary house in Yangzhou City. Wang Jinglu Academy kept coughing. He stood outside the door for a while to make sure there was no ambush. Then he walked into the house, and put the medicine on the table. He asked, "What do you think?" A young man was lying on the bed. His thin cheeks were very pale, and he looked very haggard. The smell of medicine in the house could not completely cover the smell of blood behind the bed. There was a pile of gauze stained with blood behind the bed. The man was Cui Huasheng. He was a member of the Cui family. His wife, Qiu Fangu, was the youngest daughter of the former Ruyang Zhizhou of the Tang Empire. On the day of the rebellion, the Qiu family was destroyed by the rebel army, and his wife died on the spot. Cui Huasheng was so angry that he made a speech in Yangzhou City. Finally, he was punished by the Cui family. He was beaten in the family temple, and hung on a pillar for 3 days before he was released. The family rules of the Qinghe clans had always been strict. If Cui Huasheng was not the nephew of the clan leader, Cui Shi, he would have been beaten to death. Even so, he was severely injured. Even though he survived, the wounds on his body never healed. He could only lie on the sickbed and suffer like this. Cui Huasheng looked at the man in the bamboo hat and said in a hoarse voice, "If I want to go to Fuchin River and enter the Cui Garden, it is not difficult, but I need time." Wang Jinglu took off his bamboo hat and said, "Why do you need time?" Seeing him take off his bamboo hat and reveal his true face, Cui Huasheng trusted him more. He said, "It takes some time to pretend to be remorseful and admit your mistakes. Otherwise, no one will believe you." Wang Jinglu nodded and said, "That makes sense. I was worried that I would appear too stiff. Fortunately, we have more time now." Cui Huasheng said, "Cui Shi's birthday banquet is over. There are still some days before the next Cui Garden banquet." Wang Jinglu calculated the time, and found that it coincided with the right to light. He said, "That's just right." Cui Huasheng seemed to have thought of something and coughed again. After a while, he calmed down and looked at Wang Jinglu and asked seriously, "Aren't you worried that killing too many people will force the Divine Hall to fight?" Wang Jinglu thought that as long as Ning Ke fought at the right to light, the war that had stopped for more than half a year would definitely start again. What was there to worry about? The Tang Empire had just recovered from the war, and was not ready to fight against the whole world again. It still needed some time to prepare psychologically, and in terms of resources. But the Academy was ready for it. They believed that as long as Ning Ke could carry out the plan perfectly, the West Hill Divine Palace would not dare to start a war. What really worried the Academy was the drunkard and the butcher, the 2 swords that had been hanging outside Chang'an. But it was also because of this that the academy was determined to carry out the plan. Only by doing so could they stop the two from fighting, even if it was only for a while. Eldest brother was not at the back of the mountain of the academy. He should still be in the palace, presiding over the restoration of the god-stunning array. Fourth brother and sixth brother were also there as assistants. Third sister Yu Lian had gone far away after the battle. The rest were still in the long process of healing. Now the back of the mountain of the academy was under the command of second brother. Junemo was a swordsman. If he wanted to protect the back of the mountain of the academy, he had to sharpen his sword. That was why he had been sitting under the waterfall behind the courtyard to sharpen his sword these days. He had been sharpening his sword day and night. Now he had worn through more than 10 hard stones, but he still could not calm down. It was like the sleeve on his arm swaying in the wind. Muyu walked to the lakeside with the food box in her hand. She looked at his empty sleeve and his neatly combed gray hair. She felt a little gloomy. Then she said gently, "The headmaster once said that Pippi was happy and knew his destiny. He must be blessed in this life. Youngest brother is in the Peach Mountain. You must save him." Junemo could not calm down. It was not because of his gray hair and broken arm. It was not because he had no hope of reaching the state of the headmaster or the youngest uncle. It was because Chun Pippi was going to die. In the back of the mountain of the academy, he had taught Chun Pippi a lesson the most. He had hit him with the academy rules the most and talked to him the most. He had a close relationship with Chun Pippi. The right to light was about to begin. Chun Pippi was going to die, but he could only sit by the lakeside and sharpen this seemingly unbreakable iron sword. How could he be calm? There are many powerhouses in the divine halls of West Hill. I heard that the hierarch has recovered his state. There are also the swindlers from the Golden Tribe, and the bald ass from the Xiankong Temple. Even though senior brother's plan seems to be flawless and youngest brother's execution is top-notch, we did not know that Pippi was in the Peach Mountain. That's why I am worried. Muyu knew that no matter what she said, she could not cheer him up. She put the food box on the rocks by the lakeside and said, "Eat first. Remember to go home tonight. It's cold outside." Junemo was not used to the word go home, but he knew what he had to do. He stood up and said, "Thank you for your hard work these days. I will go home tonight." After eating, Junemo continued sharpening his sword. The hard bluestone surface was ground into fine powder by the iron sword. The powder floated on the surface of the water. That was probably the strong foam. Two young men came to the lakeside and brought him water. At the same time, they carried the food box back to the small courtyard. Looking at Junmo's lonely back, they hesitated. Finally, Li Guangdi mustered up his courage and said, "Teacher, I heard from eldest uncle that if you read more Buddhist scriptures." Li Guangdi and Zhang Nianzu had not officially started cultivating since they were sent to the academy. They had not reached the initial awareness state, and were just ordinary people. But after spending a lot of time with the uncle masters in the back of the mountain, they vaguely understood some principles of cultivation. Or rather, they only vaguely understood some words. Seeing their teacher being distressed by sharpening his sword by the lakeside, they were very anxious. They even tried to give Junemo some ideas. Li Guangdi's voice became smaller and smaller, because he himself felt that he was talking nonsense. Moreover, they knew from the fifth uncle that their teacher hated Buddhism and monks. It was said that the stone statue of Buddha on the Hua Mountain that crushed the Lank Temple was cut down by his teacher with his sword. How could he ask his teacher to cultivate in Buddhism? Junemo did not look back or get angry. He said, "When we get to the small town, listen to Chao Xiaoshu. Even though you haven't started cultivating, you are disciples of the academy. You can't bring shame to the academy." Many years ago, when Ning Kai took the students of the academy to the wilderness for practice, he said the same thing. The request was simple, but it was also very stressful. The two young men thought about the upcoming journey and the things they had to do. They were a little afraid and looked at their teacher's back reluctantly. Zhang Nianzu hesitated and said, "Teacher, this time we may not come back alive. Don't worry, we are not afraid, and we won't bring shame to the academy. It's just that." Junemo did not let his disciple finish his words. He turned around and looked at them and said, "As long as you want to live, you will. Even if Haotian asks me, this is the only answer I can give." That night, Junemo stopped sharpening his sword and returned to the small courtyard. Muyu made supper for him and brought breakfast the next morning. She sent Zhang Mianzu and Li Guangdi out of the Cloud Gate array and to the front of the academy. She kept reminding them. The two young men knelt down and kowtowed to her. Li Guangdi said, "Masteress, you'd better go back early. I am still worried about the teacher." Muyu smiled and touched his head. She did not leave until the horse carriage left the meadow. Since she was the masteress, she had to act like one. When she returned to the small courtyard at the back of the mountain, she realized that she should have come back earlier, just as Li Guangdi had said. She looked at the gray hair on the ground and was extremely shocked. When Junemo raised his head from the well, her body swayed and she almost fainted. Junemo was very particular about his appearance. His hair was always neatly combed, no matter if it was black or gray. The ancient crown was always straight. Now his hair could no longer be combed as meticulously as before. He could no longer wear the iconic ancient crown, because he had cut off his hair. Try to finish the next chapter before 4:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.